Streaming today, yes, we are streaming now. Ba 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 ba. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's good. That's working. That's working. What's going on, my little weird Twitch stream? What are you doing? Yeah, it says it's streaming. It says it's streaming. I'm not getting a stream onto Twitch. Ah, technical difficulties. For no reason. Nothing's changed. The moment we've all been waiting for. Kevin, good to see you. Good to see you. Huh. That's very strange. Twitch stream's not working. Oh well. I'm not going to do anything about it. I don't care that much. I'm not going to cry too much about it. Well, I'll cry a little bit about it. For you guys. How are you all doing today? I don't know, I feel exhausted. it's just the truth. I just feel super duper exhausted and like, oh well, content feeling powerfully gay. How about all y'all? I saw somebody, Fiddleford, good to see you. I saw Sean Strickland, an MMA fighter, has been posting all of this anti-gay stuff, and it's classic like 90s anti-gay stuff. Oh, there's Twitch. Great. LED, good to see you. Fiddleford, good to see you. Glad to be back. Glad to see you guys. And it's just the most ridiculous, absurd stuff. Like, according to these people, they wake up every day and choose to be straight. Right? They're just choosing to be straight. Resist, good to see you on Twitch. Gabriel, good to see you. I'm so glad to see all of you guys. It's so nice to see you guys. I'll start but with a bit of an announcement. Secrets, good to see you. Oh, Secrets, giving us one of your unleashing one of your secrets upon us. That you're from Mexico. Wow, good to see you. I'm not going to be streaming on Thursday. Just to let you guys know. I'm going to put that in the Discord as well. I'm not going to be streaming on Thursday. That's just capitalism getting in the way of everything, as always. But it's for a good cause, because it means that one of the young ladies that I work with gets to go see her friend's theatrical performance. That's what it's all about. So I'm just going to help her out. Means I don't get to stream on Thursday, but I think one stream to help a young lady out, sure. So, as always, with what's been going on in today's news, not too much by way of like big explosive stories. Although, this one, let's see if I have it. Let's see if oh yeah, just straight up. Boeing whistleblower John Barnett found dead in the United States. Imagine waking up and choosing to be straight. Perish the thought. I don't know, I like women. Women are nice. Oh well, Resist, that's very kind of you to say. Any stream you do is a gift we are grateful for. No obligations, comrade. How kind of you to say. How kind of you to say. So this story, the Boeing whistleblower, I literally had not been hearing, just me, good to see you. I had not been hearing about this story at all until a friend of mine told me about what's been going on with the Boeing jets. XD, good to see you as always. So apparently, Boeing jets have been falling apart in midair. Straight up, just like a door blowing off the hinges mid-flight kind of stuff. Wheels falling off. Just straight up like basic stuff. And now we have a whistleblower who's been talking about this phenomenon found dead in the United States. A former Boeing employee known for raising concerns about the firm's production standards has been found dead in the United States. John Barnett had worked for Boeing for 32 years until his retirement in 2017. In the days before his death, he had been giving evidence in a whistleblower lawsuit against the company. Boeing said it was saddened to hear of Mr. Barnett's passing. The Charleston County coroner confirmed his death to the BBC on Monday. It said the 62-year-old had died from a self-inflicted wound on the 9th of March, and police were investigating. Yeah, just like that time, like a whistleblower was found with 2 gunshots to the back of his head, and they declared it a suicide. Yep. No, this sounds, it's just like how Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, right? Like, this is just some normal, regular things that actually, yeah. Whistleblowers blowing their head off, so normal. Yeah, exactly. CIA Prize for Journalism. From 2010, he worked as a quality manager in the North Charleston plant making the 787 Dreamliner, a state-of-the-art airliner used mainly on long-haul routes. In 2019, Mr. Barnett told the BBC that under-pressure workers had been deliberately fitting substandard parts to aircraft on the production line. He also said he had uncovered serious problems with oxygen systems, which could mean 1 in 4 breathing masks would not work in an emergency. He said soon, after starting work in South Carolina, he had become concerned that the push to get new aircraft built meant the assembly process was rushed and safety was compromised, something the company denied. He later told the BBC that workers had failed to follow procedures intended to track components through the factory, allowing defective components to go missing. He said in some cases, substandard parts had even been removed from scrap bins and fitted to planes that were being built to prevent delays on the production line. He also claimed that tests on emergency oxygen systems due to be fitted to the 787 showed a failure rate of 25%, meaning that 1 in 4 could fail to deploy in a real-life emergency. Boeing denied his assertions. However, a 2017 review by the U.S. regulator, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, did uphold some of Mr. Barnett's concerns. It established that the location of at least 53 non-conforming parts in the factory was unknown and that they were considered lost. Boeing was ordered to take remedial action, which I'm totally sure they definitely did. Oh yeah, they did do remedial action. They killed this guy. On the oxygen cylinders issue, the company said that in 2017 it had identified some oxygen bottles received from the supplier that were not deploying properly, but it denied that any of them were actually fitted on aircraft. Not that they know. Right? Not that they know. They just literally, like up here, they literally confessed, just being like, yeah, we don't know where anything is. So they don't know. They got no fucking idea what's going on. After retiring, he embarked on a long-running legal action against the company. He accused it of denigrating his character and hampening his career because of the issues he pointed out, charges rejected by Boeing. At the time of his death, Mr. Barnett had been in Charleston for legal interviews linked to that case. Yeah, this is a mob hit. Like, right? Anybody sitting here being like, wow, I guess it's just normal for a guy who's, being a whistleblower in a case to just kill himself like that. It's a normal thing that seems to happen a lot. There's a lot of precedent for it, where whistleblowers just spontaneously kill themselves by shooting themselves in the back of the head. Last year, he gave a formal deposition in which he was questioned by Boeing's lawyers before being cross-examined by his own counsel. He had been due to undergo further questioning on Saturday. When he did not appear, inquiries were made at his hotel. He was subsequently found dead in his truck in the hotel car park. Speaking to the BBC, his lawyer described his death as tragic. In a statement, Boeing said, "We are saddened by Mr. Barnett's passing, and our thoughts are with his friends and family." His death comes at a time when production standards at both Boeing and its key supplier, Spirit AeroSystems, are under intense scrutiny. This follows an incident in early January when an unused emergency exit door blew off a brand new Boeing 737 MAX shortly after takeoff from Portland International Airport. A preliminary report from the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board suggested that 4 key bolts designed to hold the doors securely in place were not fitted. Last week, the FFA said A 6-week audit of the company had found multiple instances where the company allegedly failed to comply with manufacturing quality and control requirements. Here's your capitalist innovation, you guys. Here it is, right? How can we make it cheaper to get people into planes? John, did you ever play Eve, or is the advert just random? I did play. I downloaded Eve online because I was kind of fascinated with it. I am actually like fascinated with the idea of like being in a space simulator kind of thing. But every single time I do it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is boring. This is boring. Most of these games, like any of these games, are literally like, we've done it. We've managed to capture being extremely bored in space. You're gonna be in space. You're gonna be in space. We've done it. We've captured it. Right? Like all of these games, like Endless Space, or what's the other one where it had like a crappy launch and now everybody's like, oh, it's actually good now. Right? Like I sat down and played it and I was like, oh yeah, cool, they did it. I'm in space. I feel as though I'm in space. They've really captured the essence of living in space. And it turns out that it's mainly boring. It's just a very boring experience where you're surrounded by lots of nothing. And you go to a place and nothing happens. And then you spend a lot of time flipping switches and like going through, and then the stars will streak by you and you'll get there and then nothing will happen. And you do nothing when you're there. You like harvest a rock or something. And then you connect that harvested rock to another thing to make something so that it'll do something so that you can build like a building and have a shack, and so that nothing will happen. It's just a nothing boring generator in space. And it's like, I just don't care at all. Like, I understand why people do. It's fine. But just, it's escapism. But it's the most boring type of escapism. Literally like, ooh, we're in space. Anyway, so this story is wild, right? Like this story, the Boeing whistleblower John Barnett story, literally Boeing not building its planes properly, obviously so that a guy at the top can buy like a yacht or a Jeffrey Epstein pedophile island or whatever, right? No Man's Sky is the closest they got, I think, to making one of these that's actually okay. Because it's closer to Minecraft. Like, Minecraft is great. It's Legos, like it's digital Legos, right? And No Man's Sky is like, we could do that. We could do digital Legos, right? But I just don't know. I just don't care. Like, I just don't. Like, I just don't. Anytime I'm playing a game like No Man's Sky, I just imagine my character playing a video game. You understand? Like, I'd be like, oh, sweet, I can build this console so that now I can play a real video game. Yeah, Muxel Place on Twitch says, the only reason we need space is getting resources to Earth and finding a place to live when we destroy our planet. The idea that we will somehow emigrate to another planet successfully while destroying the planet that we are on is charming. It's a charming idea that I think comes out of the brain of like guys like Elon Musk and Bezos, like just not very intelligent people who just struck while the iron was hot. And like, you're not going to terraform a planet to make it suitable for human life while simultaneously destroying the planet that you are on. It's just not a legitimate thing that's going to be serious. And until we actually find methods to continue our technological growth while simultaneously honoring and respecting the systems that we actually are on, we're not going anywhere, dude. We're not going anywhere. Elon is such a genius. Dude, Elon's the stupidest. Like, Elon's a dummy. Like, he's rich, right? Like, what Elon Musk has proved to everybody is that you can con your way into looking intelligent with enough money. That, like, he really is probably one of the greatest con men that have ever lived. And his success, like the thing that makes him different than somebody like Elizabeth Banks, right, who was a brilliant con woman, right? She was a con artist of a phenomenal level. She created a company called Theranos, got billions of dollars invested in just like an obvious fraudulent scam. The whole thing fell apart, collapsed, and uh, uh, but the only reason it really fell apart under her is she got uh, bigger money than her involved in it. That was her flaw. That was the thing that caused her problems. Is that she got people like Henry Kissinger involved. She got big name money involved, and when they realized this was a scam, they weren't just going to let her get away with it. Whereas Elon Musk's scam is it's good for two good reasons, right? Scam number one is that he's not getting like bigger money than him involved. He's not getting bigger names than him involved. But if they are involved, they're using him for other processes, right? Like he's helping the United States military militarize space. Like that's very obviously what he's doing. Right? That's very clearly what he's doing. And he's helping them militarize space. And so he gets away with a lot of stuff because he's in on, because he's got people in on the scam in a great way. Well, and also, like, yeah, I'm sure he's never read Marx. If Elon Musk did read Marx, he'd have to misunderstand it purposefully, right? Because of his position and who he is. Like, that's what I've always said about a lot of these guys. We will eventually colonize the moon. I mean, Russia and China keep talking about it. But I don't think that colonizing the moon is a smart choice. I think it's a bad idea. You don't want to mess with the thing that's responsible for regulating our tides, right? Like, you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to have a base, like you want to have like a security station, right? A launch point, a place to so people can exist and live, on a surface, to have some stability in space and have it act as a stabilizing sort of thing. But you don't want it to be like a colony. You don't want people to live there, right? Like sometimes people say things like, we should mine the moon. I'm like, that's the dumbest shit. Like that's stupid. Like that really should tell you that there's a lot of dummies walking around being like, yeah, we should destabilize the thing that's responsible for regulating our tide system. That's a great idea. Can he even read? Yes, of course, Kevin, Elon Musk can read. How else could he make that really crappy build in Elden Ring? Can I be really straight with you? What I think is the funniest thing about the Elon Musk saga is that I actually do think his showing his build in Elden Ring was a moment where lots of people went, oh, this guy's stupid. Like, and I know that sounds petty, it sounds really dumb, but I do think it's true. That, like, there's no way, looking at his build in Elden Ring, that you're sitting there being like, how is this isn't like this is just some random bullshit. Like, this is not, how is this even a game? How are you even doing it? He made an int build because he thought it makes him intelligent, but he was like carrying around like 3 shields and like doing all kinds of like dumb shit. And it was like, just like, and I think it was a moment that cracked the propaganda fissure. It created a fissure in the wall because people bought into the idea that Elon Musk was super smart because he bought himself in. Right? Like, he just paid a lot of people and he made a lot of money, and he made them a lot of money. Just say that I'm smart. Just say, like, when you're here's Star Trek executives, when you give a list of intelligent people in the past, just mention my name, right? Like, equate me with the new Tony Stark. Have Tony Stark have a conversation with me, Marvel executives. Like, he embedded himself into our culture, and he convinced everybody that he's this super smart guy. When you actually look at his history, and you look at how it is he moved forward, he basically just bought his way in the entire time. And just basically said, here, sign this NDA, I own this property, that means, and I have the right to say I invented it. even though you invented it, but you sign an NDA and here's a couple $1 million and never talk about it. Like, it's what I think Elon Musk proves to everybody is that with enough money, you can convince people that you're smart. And the whole thing's falling apart now with Twitter, right? Like, the Twitter fiasco, at this stage in the game, if you're still like rah rah Elon Musk, it's like, have you not been like paying any attention to this disastrous Twitter fiasco? Because what's so funny about Twitter and the Twitter fiasco, Mikhail, good to see you, is that other powerful people are not connected to it, right? Like things like SpaceX and all of these other projects, like you can see pretty clearly that there's military. The military wants to be involved. The military wants to be there. The military's involved in it. The military's talking to him, right? So he can only dick around with it so much, right? Twitter is his. Like, it's straight up his. And nobody cares. Like, nobody's going to stand in the way if he wants to destroy it and do what he's doing with it. And I think the dumbest thing that he's done that I think doesn't get pointed out enough is that we were all calling these things tweets. Everybody knew what Twitter was, right? Like, there was a whole language that we had all bought into. Everybody had bought into it. From a branding perspective, it was completely 100% successful. Total penetration. I'm going to tweet this, right? You had grown-ass journalists and grown-ass people, politicians, talking about tweeting. The President of the United States used your platform in order to help his presidential campaign by effectively tweeting, right? And Elon Musk comes around and says, no, this is named X now. And when you post, it'll be called posting. That's the dumbest shit. Like, that's so dumb. Like, and tells you very clearly that he doesn't have anybody around him who's actually telling him that his ideas are stupid. And if those people are around him, he definitely doesn't listen to them. Because that's a stupid idea. Just from a basic, like, I want to run a successful business. Like, trying to change this whole thing to X for some reason. Like, why? You have a successful brand. And so he's effectively destroying the brand. And it won't be too much longer until the whole thing falls apart. Because he doesn't know what he's doing. Yeah, Russia claims part of the moon. America gets in war with Russia, drops a nuke there. This is why I've said it for like my whole life. We cannot be a successful spacefaring people under capitalism. We cannot be a successful intergalactic community. We can't have colonies on Mars. We can't have colonies anywhere else with this colonialist, capitalist, wealth extractionist ideology. It's just not possible. And it's not possible for the most obvious reason you can possibly imagine, which is that space doesn't give a fuck about your petty little bullshit conversations and quandaries. Like, forget about, like, dropping a nuke. Right? Forget about nuking the moon. Forget about, the Russians are building a space base and so we need to drop a moon there. You could literally just take a bunch of bolts and just throw it at the space station and it will obliterate it. Like, space is an unforgiving, unrelenting, uncaring place that will not tolerate your cowboy-esque fuckery. It's not going to tolerate it for even a moment. That if you step out of line and disrespect space, space will simply kill you. And it'll happen, boom, like that. It won't care. Like, we haven't taken the time to investigate the bottom of our ocean, right? And there's a reason for that. Because the bottom of the ocean has a similar attitude. Right? It is a massive, unrelenting, uncaring, unyielding place in which you have to follow its rules. And if you don't, you die. And it's fast and it happens immediately. So nobody does it. Because it's an incredible pursuit. And the idea that we're going to go to a place that's worse, significantly worse, and try to make a go of it there while we actively avoid the training ground. Like, the place that's obviously for us to train for space is the bottom of the ocean, very clearly. And until we have mastery of our own environment, until we actually, and when I say mastery, I mean, like, literally we understand that we have to follow the rules. Like, right now we're acting like a bunch of children who are pretending like there are no rules, and that if there are rules, then they only exist for us to break them. And that's made us that very obviously that's turned us into stupid idiots. Like, and the Earth is making it very clear to us that we're a bunch of stupid idiots. And it's only going to be a group of people and a society of people who say, yeah, there's very clearly rules that have to very obviously be followed. And within that rule structure, we can all work in order to gain a mastery of an understanding of what's going on this planet. And after that's achieved, then we can talk about going to space. Then we can talk about actually building, like, secondary systems and secondary colonies on other planets and all this kind of stuff. But the idea that we're going to go to space while burning the shit out of the planet that we're on, shut up. Like, no, we're not. It's a dumb idea. And moreover, it's just not going to work. Like, and it's not going to work for the obvious reasons, right? Like, you can't have a fist fight in space. Like, you can't have these petty arguments in space, right? You can't. The CIA is going to go over there and coup the moon base kind of bullshit. Like, it's not going to work, right? It's just not going to work. So this whole ethos, this American Western ethos, just needs to die, and because we have to be cooperative. We have to be communists. We have to actually acknowledge reality exists and abide by the rules that reality have put in front of us. So if we're not going to do that, then we don't get to go to space. Just like we don't go to the bottom of the ocean. Just like we don't know anything, right? Like, it's my favorite. We pretend like we know a lot of stuff. We know nothing. We don't even try. Oh, yeah, here we go. We are a half hour in, and we have somebody, bro, communism never worked anywhere. My man, just admit that you don't know anything about communism, okay? Like, it's okay to not know anything about a subject. What is embarrassing is admitting in front of people that you don't know anything about it while kind of pretending like you do. So your statement that communism has never worked anywhere just tells me very cleanly, very plainly, that you are illiterate and don't know anything about the subject. Right? And that's fine. So if you are illiterate and don't know anything about a subject, your best position is to just acknowledge that's the case and start from there and ask questions about the subject from that position. Because, like, you could take a look at this major successes of the Soviet Union. Like, the Soviet Union went from being, like, a feudal economy to being the first people into space within a single generation. To pretend like that's not a success. And they did that while under threat of attack from Nazis. They fought World War II, for God's sakes. So, like, your position is kind of weird from my perspective, and just tells me that you don't actually know anything about the subject. So if you'd like to have, like, a grown-up conversation about it, you can go ahead with that. But if you're just going to sit there and sort of do this CIA garbage, I don't know. I don't know why you want to limit your own intelligence like that. It's the confidence that it gets me, you know? I don't know anything about the subject, I've never read anything, but I'm definitely sure that this is the truth because some guy told me on a website that lies to me constantly. Do you know anything about Chinese history? Yeah, the Chinese Communist Party has been very successful. Like, again, I just don't think you know anything about the subject. Like, very, very cleanly. Yeah, an unpaid CIA volunteer. Daddy told me so. That kind of thinking. Like, it's just kind of getting embarrassing for these capitalists, right? Like, their system is in decay. Their system is in this collapsing decline. They don't know what to do about it. Oh, this is something I wanted to play. Here's oh no, this isn't the thing I wanted to play. This is what I wanted to play. Here's a thing that actually happened, you guys. Here's a thing that really actually happened. The Imperial March plays over the loudspeaker of a U.S. Army vessel departing on a mission to construct a temporary port for aid deliveries to Gaza. Yeah, of course. Of course. Here, I'm going to do a full refresh. So I mean, these guys are Nazis, right? Like we can just like call it. Like you're literally playing the Imperial March. Like these guys are space, like the Empire in Star Wars are space Nazis, right? That's what they obviously are. It's very clear that they're space Nazis. And here's the United States military, the U.S. Army, playing the Imperial March while going on a supposedly peaceful mission in order to build a port for aid deliveries to Gaza, which, again, if you believe that that port is being built for temporary port for aid delivery, if you actually believe that, you are a dumb person. It's a dumb thing to believe. They're obviously building a port there so that they can funnel resources into Israel so that they can build a construction project in Israel. That's what's going on, right? That's what's going on. And and they're doing it fully aware, right? They're fully aware. These people know exactly who they are, right? They understand that they're Nazis. They understand what their position is in history. They understand, and they're fine with it. They're fine with it, right? They're playing the Imperial March. They're going into places and destroying species and races and groups because they think that they're inferior than them and just need to subjugate themselves to them. Like, that's their position. So it is just mask off. That's exactly right, XD. Like, it's totally mask off. The only people who are still walking around thinking that this system of capital is actually working are people who are so buried in the sand, or who are themselves Nazis, right? Like a guy like Ben Shapiro is obviously a creepy little Nazi. Here's Ben Shapiro saying no one in the United States should be retiring at 65 years old. Frankly, I think recruitment itself is a stupid idea. Retirement itself is a stupid idea, unless you have some sort of health problem. This, of course, kind of reveals that he doesn't actually work a job, right? Like Ben Shapiro is like kind of just killing time here because he's not an intelligent person. We have Trebek, TF you do to stop capitalism. You're broke, it's your fault. I mean, that's just the dumbest thing ever. You could tell with the spelling here. To pretend as though people who are living in homelessness while working full-time jobs are in that state because it's their fault is such a reduced, like, it's stupid. Like, it's just a stupid way to think about the world. Like, obviously false. Like, false for the obvious reasons. People get born into circumstances that are that inflict them with poverty, and that poverty exists as a social system in order to ensure a constant extraction of wealth by the wealthy. Like, to look at people who are living in tents and who are living in these sorts of situations and pretend as though they're there because it's their fault. I think it just requires a complete shutoff Not just of your intellectual capacity, but of your empathetic capacity. Like it's just staggering. Mikhail, it's appropriate to disdain Nazi or Zionist or Christian Zionist evangelical ideology. Yeah, they're all genocidal racists. Yes, pretty clearly. Ben Shapiro is shrieking at Jonathan Glazer. Yeah, Jonathan Glazer was the fellow who won an Academy Award for his Holocaust movie very recently. Has a new bookshelf on Twitch. Good to see you. And and he gave, like, I would argue that the statement that he made at the Oscars was fairly, I don't want to use the word tepid. That's too strong in the direction that I'm going for, but it wasn't radical. It wasn't a radical statement. The fact that there was just any statement whatsoever seems to be the problem, and the response from the fascists on the right, people like Ben Shapiro, has been extremely mask off. Right, like these people are obviously Nazis. We're looking at a Nazi culture here, and yeah, exactly. Ben Shapiro never mentioning desocialized healthcare for the Zionist entity. Yeah, isn't that funny how the libertarian right and the fascists on the right, they only seem to want desocialized systems for the poor in our country. If we provide that for people in other countries, like the Zionists or Israel, that's fine, right? Since our government gives social-like people candies to kids on Halloween, a lot of people don't even work. There's just no evidence to support that claim. That's just some brain-dead propaganda that you've heard on the internet somewhere. There's literally no evidence to support that claim. In fact, you'll find that a huge proportion of people who are living in homelessness work full-time jobs. You're going to find that if you actually look at the evidence, if you actually look at what's going on in the world around you, that the people who are living in poverty and the people who are living in homelessness and the people who are in this state are working. That they're working a lot. This idea that nobody wants and like, you have fallen for this divide. That the what the capitalist class wants to do constantly is it wants to divide the working class. So one of the ways that it does to divide the working class is it pretends as though the tax-paying section of the working class, right? So they levy taxes against certain sections of the working class, and then they pretend as though those taxes are what are paying for the luxurious lifestyle of the homeless and the poor, the welfare queens and all this. And you've just fallen for it, right? You've just completely fallen for it. That what you are actually paying for is you're paying for the lifestyle of the rich. You're paying for people who extract your surplus value, who take away your productivity so you don't get to keep it for yourself, so that they can go buy Jeffrey Epstein's pedophile island or something, right? No, it's not. See, you're a nationalist, right? Like, I'm talking about a system of capital, right? And the system of capital supersedes nationalist politics. That nationalism is used by the system of capital in order to divide the working class and have them fight each other. But if you're unaware of that system of capital and the only thing you ever think of is nationalism, and that's all you can ever perceive is the nationalist identity and the nationalist concept, then you literally cannot understand the subject. You can't understand what's being said to you because you only think of anything in the nationalist viewpoint. So you need to elevate your thinking and move outside and beyond the simple nationalist identity politics and get into the mode of understanding what capitalism and what the system of capital actually is and how it actually works. Right, I understand, Trebek. You're a nationalist, right? You're talking about nations, and you're talking about the nation state. You're talking about and that's how you want to understand things. And I'm telling you, if that's where you are, then you can't understand the subject. that the system of capital is beyond the nation state and beyond nationalism and beyond those subjects. That you have, as a Polish person, you have more in common with every other nation's workers than you do with the capitalists in your own nation. And and nationalism is useful. It's useful for the capitalist class to use against the working class, because they can pretend as though, oh, we're all in this together. We're all Poles that work together, right? And I mean, Poland has a significant far right movement. Like, most of Europe is moving extremely far to the right. Has a New Bookshelf asks, what are your thoughts on elites playing with biology to... I want to assume that word is supposed to be biologically. Biologically engineer humans like chimeras for different purposes. Yeah, like eugenics. That's what it is. It's eugenics. It's always going to be bad because we're not intelligent. But moreover, like, not just our lack of intelligence, but our disrespect. I think that's the thing that is our biggest downfall, and that the universe will constantly, and the earth will constantly flick us in the forehead for, is our complete and total disregard and disrespect of the systems that generated us in the first place. Right? Trevitt, go talk to my 90-year-old grandparents about living under communism. Okay, who did your grandparents support? On whose side of that conflict were they, do you think? Right? In Poland. And I suspect I know the answer. No, things like eugenics, like there is a correct way to go about what we would call genetic modification, right? Like, you could, like, basic ranching, right? Like breeding selectively, like these sorts of things we've always done. But eugenicists want to take it into an entirely new level and an entirely new thing that exists outside the realm of human respect. Like, we don't respect our environment. We don't respect our own genetics. We don't respect anything. We think that we can literally just, like, turn some dials, and then that'll create some kind of chimera super soldier, and there'll be no consequences for it. And it's, like, stupid. So it's going to be a failure, right? Because we have no respect for the subject. We don't respect the earth that we're on. Oh yeah, we're having a healthy debate now with this Trebek fellow. Who, I mean, it's tricky, right? Like, Poland is experiencing like a fairly far right movement right now, which makes sense given the trajectory of Europe generally. Those far right sentiments, I think, are extremely heightened given that the conflict that's happening in Ukraine is extremely close to Poland. Poland is also, like, if any nation should be aggrieved from the Soviet Union and from the Soviet period, it's Poland. Like, Poland was caught in the crossfire of the Nazis and the communists. I'm always kind of surprised that more Poles don't seem to really hate on the Nazis, as, like, the Nazis were the antagonists of that whole thing, that they seem to really go after communists more than Nazis, but that seems to be the far right element, and plays pretty cleanly with the kind of eradication of Nazism from our consciousness, that we're putting in a lot of work and a lot of effort to not actually talk about the Nazis and not actually have the Nazis be remembered at all, right? We're trying to forget about the Nazis, so that when we start doing Nazi shit, we can, nobody will actually stand up and be like, oh, hey, that's the Nazis, right? Like, when Germany is just now Where is it? I had it. It's right in front of me. Germany is tinkering with the idea of actually uh, uh, moving forward with Nazi propaganda and actually instituting the Holodomor Nazi propaganda, which would be just like a hearkening back to the Nazi period. And there's been lots of moments where Germany has been like the current ruling class in Germany is having conversations with outright neo-Nazi parties and Nazi organizations. I must have not. That's fine. And so we are looking at a society and at a culture, the Western culture, that is swinging dramatically far to the right. Dramatically far to the right. And the propaganda systems that exist in the United States and in the West generally are pushing the country and pushing things further and further to the right. Right. Trebek, yeah, because that's the system of capital. That's how the system of capital operates. The system of capital supports people to get into positions of power, politicians who are willing to do a process of extraction and abandonment. And communists are the ones that step forward, point out that this exists, and say that, hey, we should probably do away with this. We should probably not permit wealthy private holders to, at the very least, influence our political scene at all. We have half socialist, half capitalistic government. No, you have a capitalist government. That what happens? I keep hearing this kind of social democrat argument constantly. Like the social democratic systems that exist throughout Europe and the West generally, Canada, United States, these are echoes. These are echoes of a period of time where the system of capital found itself getting into reformist positions because there was serious threat of communist overthrow. That trade unionists, leftists, socialists, and communists were organizing in order to overthrow the state. That was happening in America. That was happening all across Europe. And so capitalists put themselves into reformist mindset. Because if we can give some concessions, maybe they won't overthrow us. And it worked in some places, right? And so we have this vestige of concessions given to people thanks to the threat of communist revolution and thanks to the work of trade unionists, socialists, and communists. But because of the McCarthy period and because of the eradication of communism throughout Europe and America, the steady extraction of that thinking from the West, now the capitalists are putting themselves a position where all of those reforms are going to be taken away. You can see it across America. Like, America has actually done it, that they have actually rolled back the New Deal, mainly. There are still, of course, vestiges of it, and there are still tiny things here and there. But like they're going after Social Security, they're going after all kinds of welfare systems, and they're doing so very openly. And that's happening in Europe as well. It's happening in the UK, certainly. And it's going to continue happening, where they're going to roll back all of these reforms that were put in thanks to communists and socialists actually threatening legitimate revolution in those countries. So the idea that places like Poland, the idea that a place like Germany, right, is somehow socialist. Like, no, these places are capitalist. They're being run by capitalists for the benefit of capitalists. That most countries have a dynamic where there are two parties that are essentially capitalist parties that pass the ball back and forth to one another. And that's done to keep power within the hands of the system of capital. So here in Canada, it's between the Liberals and the Conservatives, right? That the Liberals will get into power under the promise of doing reformism, which they don't do. And if they do, it's like 0.2% over 10 years. And then that ball passes over to the conservatives, and they strip all of those systems away, and they strip it down. And then the ball passes back over to liberals, and then they do pretend reformism. And then the ball passes back over to conservatives, and they strip, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth it goes. That's how the system of capital maintains its power. It's not interested. And so if you, Trebek, someone like you, comes in and starts to blame the poor, or immigrants is another good one, well, then you're doing the work of the capitalists, right? You're helping capitalists, because that's their strategy, is to turn the working class against itself, to ensure that power always remains in the hands of the capitalists. Don't allow any organization to prop up that actually says that the poor are victims of the system of capital. Don't allow any system to come up that actually organizes with immigrants and with people in order to support things. Don't do any of that, right? Don't focus on the actual issue, which is the system of capital and the wealthy, right? Especially as they extract more wealth from you currently. Like that's what's so kind of funny about this whole conversation, is that no thought is given whatsoever to people who are literally extracting trillions of dollars from the society. Over the COVID period, the top 1% of the society extracted $3.5 trillion from the rest of the society. Like, it's the largest extraction of wealth that has ever occurred in the history of the nation, and then people turn around and blame the poor. Like, I just can't take that seriously, and I find it to be an extraordinarily odd position to take. Has a New Bookshelf asks, do you believe they've created bioengineered animal chimeras that escaped from faculties deliberately let out in wild public lands? I'd have to see something pretty significant to convince me of that. Like, do I think it exists within the realm of total possibility? Sure. Like, sure, if you want to get into if you want to get into the conspiracy mind, fine, right? But if you want me to actually, like, talk about that in a way that I believe it, I'm going to need to see something pretty significant. Like, I'm going to need to see some hard evidence. Hard evidence on that one. I mean, I actually have a really interesting article about because I'm more or less of the opinion that we as a society are going to have a reckoning in regards to the COVID period. Because I do think that COVID was a legitimate health crisis, right? I think that that's definitely true. But I also think that a lot of fear took over, that a hysteria kind of took over, and that we're still living in that hysteria space. So here is an article from a professor of medicine at Harvard. So oftentimes when voices come up and are considered the quote-unquote anti-vax position or any of that kind of stuff, they're somewhat dismissed as kooky people. I think that literally a professor of medicine at Harvard University cannot be described that way. And I think when he writes this article, I think it should be taken seriously, and I think it should be listened to. I am no longer a professor of medicine at Harvard. This fellow's name is Martin Kulldorff. The Harvard motto is Veritas, Latin for truth. But as I discovered, truth can get you fired. This is my story. A story of a Harvard biostatistician and infectious disease epidemiologist clinging to the truth as the world lost his way during the COVID pandemic. On March 10th, 2020, before any government prompting, Harvard declared that it would suspend in-person classes and shift to online learning. Across the country, universities, schools, and state governments followed Harvard's lead. Yet it was clear from early 2020 that the virus would eventually spread across the globe and that it would be futile to try and suppress it with lockdowns. It was also clear that lockdowns would inflict enormous collateral damage, not only on education, but also on public health, including treatment for cancer, cardiovascular disease, and mental health. We will be dealing with the harm done for decades. Our children, the elderly, the middle class, the working class, and the poor around the world, all will suffer. Schools closed in many other countries too, but under heavy international criticism. Sweden kept its schools and daycares open for its 1.8 million children, ages 1 to 15. Why? While anyone can get infected, we have known since early 2020 that more than 1,000-fold difference in COVID mortality risk holds between the young and the old. Children faced minuscule risk from COVID, and interrupting their education would disadvantage them for life, especially those whose families could not afford private schools, pod schools, or tutors, or to homeschool. What were the results during the spring of 2020? With schools open, Sweden had 0 COVID deaths in the 1 to 15 age group, while teachers had the same mortality as the average of other professions. Based on those facts, summarized in a July 7, 2020 report by the Swedish Public Health Agency, all U.S. schools should have quickly reopened. Not doing so led to startling evidence on learning loss in the United States, especially among lower and middle-class children, an effect not seen in Sweden. Sweden was the one major Western country that rejected school closures and other lockdowns in favor of concentrating on the elderly, and the final verdict is now in. Led by an intellectual, all-Democrat prime minister, a welder, Sweden had the lowest excess mortality among major European countries during the pandemic, and less than half that of the United States. Sweden's COVID deaths were below average, and it avoided collateral mortality caused by lockdowns. Yet, on July 29, 2020, the Harvard-edited New England Journal of Medicine published an article by 2 Harvard professors on whether primary schools should reopen, without even mentioning Sweden. It was like ignoring the placebo control group when evaluating a new pharmaceutical drug. That's not the path to truth. That spring, I supported the Swedish approach in the op-eds published in my native Sweden. But despite being a Harvard professor, I was unable to publish my thoughts in American media. My attempts to disseminate the Swedish school report on Twitter, now X, put me on the platform's Trends blacklist. In August 2020, my op-ed on school closures in Sweden was finally published by CNN, but not the one you're thinking of. I wrote it in Spanish, and CNN Español ran it. CNN English was not interested. I was not the only public health scientist speaking out against school closures and other unscientific countermeasures. Scott Atlas, an especially brave voice, used scientific articles and facts to challenge the public health advisors in the Trump White House. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease Director Anthony Fauci, National Institutes of Health Director Francis Collins, and COVID Coordinator Deborah Bricks. But to little avail. When 98 of his Stanford faculty colleagues unjustly attacked Atlas in an open letter that did not provide a single example of where he was wrong, I wrote a response in the student-run Stanford Daily to defend him. I ended that letter by pointing out that among experts on infectious disease outbreaks, many of us have long advocated for an age-targeted strategy, and I would be delighted to debate this with any of the 98 signatories. Supporters include Professor Sunetra Gupta at Oxford University, the world's preeminent infectious disease epidemiologist. Assuming no bias against women scientists of color, I urge Stanford faculty and students to read her thoughts. None of the 98 signatories accepted my offer to debate. Instead, someone at Stanford sent complaints to my superiors at Harvard, who were not thrilled with me. I had no inclination to back down. Together with Gupta and Jay Bhattacharya at Stanford, I wrote The Great Barrington Declaration, arguing for age-based focused protection instead of universal lockdowns, with specific suggestions for how better to protect the elderly, while letting children and young adults live close to normal lives. With the Great Barrington Declaration, the silencing was broken. While it's easy to dismiss individual scientists, it was impossible to ignore 3 senior infectious disease epidemiologists from 3 leading universities. The declaration made clear that no scientific consensus existed for school closures and many other lockdown measures. In response, though, the attacks intensified and even grew slanderous. Collins, a lab scientist with limited public health experience who controls most of the nation's medical research budget, called us fringe epidemiologists and asked his colleagues to orchestrate a devastating published takedown. Some at Harvard obliged. A prominent Harvard epidemiologist publicly called the declaration an extreme fringe view, equating it with exorcism to expel demons. A member of Harvard's Center for Health and Human Rights, who had argued for school closures, accused me of trolling and having idiosyncratic politics, falsely alleging that I was enticed with Koch money, cultivated by right-wing think tanks, and won't debate anyone. A concern for those less privileged does not automatically make you right-wing. Others at Harvard worried about my scientifically inaccurate and potentially dangerous position while grappling with the protections offered by academic freedom. Though powerful scientists, politicians, and the media vigorously denounced it, the Great Barrington Declaration gathered almost 1 million signatures, including tens of thousands from scientists and healthcare professionals. We were less alone than we thought. Even from Harvard, I received more positive than negative feedback. Among many others, support came from a former chair of the Department of Epidemiology, a former dean, a top surgeon, and an autism expert, who saw firsthand the devastating collateral damage that lockdowns inflicted on her patients. While some of the support I received was public, most was behind the scenes from faculty unwilling to speak publicly. 2 Harvard colleagues tried to arrange a debate between me and opposing Harvard faculty, but just as with Stanford, there were no takers. The invitation to debate remains open. The public should not trust scientists, even Harvard scientists, unwilling to debate their positions with fellow scientists. My former employer, the Mass General Brigham Hospital System, employs the majority of Harvard Medical School faculty. It is the single largest recipient of NIH funding, over $1 billion per year from U.S. taxpayers. As part of the offensive against the Great Barrington Declaration, one of the Mass General board members, Rochelle Walensky, a fellow Harvard professor who had served on the advisory council to the NIH Director Collins, engaged me in a one-directional debate. After a Boston radio station interviewed me, Walensky came on as the official representative of the Mass General Brigham to counter me, without giving me an opportunity to respond. A few months later, she became the new CDC director. At this point, it was clear that I faced a choice between science or my academic career. I chose the former. What is science if we do not humbly pursue the truth? In the 1980s, I worked for a human rights organization in Guatemala. We provided round-the-clock international physical accompaniment to poor campesinos, unionists, women's groups, students, and religious organizations. Our mission was to protect those who spoke up against the killings and disappearances perpetrated by the right-wing military dictatorship, which shunned international scrutiny of its dirty work. Though the military threatened us, stabbed 2 of my colleagues, and threw a hand grenade into the house where we all lived and worked, we stayed to protect the brave Guatemalans. I chose then to risk my life to help protect vulnerable people. It was comparatively easy choice to risk my academic career to do the same during the pandemic. While the situation was less dramatic and terrifying than the one I faced in Guatemala, many more lives were ultimately at stake. While school closures and lockdowns were the big controversy of 2020, a new dispute emerged in 2021, the COVID vaccines. For more than 2 decades, I have helped the CDC and the FDA develop their post-market vaccine safety systems. Vaccines are a vital medical invention, allowing people to obtain immunity without the risk that comes from getting sick. The smallpox vaccine alone has saved millions of lives. In 2020, the CDC asked me to serve on its COVID-19 vaccine safety technical working group. My tenure didn't last long, though not for the reason you may think. The randomized controlled trials for the COVID vaccines were not properly designed. While they demonstrated the vaccine's short-term efficacy against symptomatic infection, they were not designed to evaluate hospitalization and death, which is what matters. In subsequent pooled RTC analysis by vaccine type, independent Danish scientists showed that the mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, did not reduce short-term all-cause mortality, while the adenovirus vector vaccines, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, Sputnik, did reduce mortality by at least 30%. I have spent decades studying drug and vaccine adverse reactions without taking any money from pharmaceutical companies. Every honest person knows that new drugs and vaccines comes with potential risks that are unknown when approved. This was a risk worth taking for older people at high risk of COVID mortality, but not for children, who have a minuscule risk for COVID mortality, nor for those who already had infection-acquired immunity. To a question about this on Twitter in 2021, I responded, "Thinking that everyone must be vaccinated is as scientifically flawed as thinking that nobody should. COVID vaccines are important for older, high-risk people and their caretakers. Those with prior natural infection do not need it, nor children." At the behest of the United States government, Twitter censored my tweet for contravening CDC policy. Having also been censored by LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube, I could not freely communicate as a scientist. Who decided that American free speech rights did not apply to honest scientific comments at odds with those of the CDC director? I was tempted just to shut up, but a Harvard colleague convinced me otherwise. Her family had been active against communism in Eastern Europe, and she reminded me that we needed to use whatever openings we could find, while self-censoring when necessary to avoid getting suspended or fired. Gotta have a dig, eh? Always just gotta have a dig at the communism thing. All right. On that score, however, I failed. A month after my tweet, I was fired from the CDC COVID Vaccine Safety Working Group. Not because I was critical of vaccines, but because I contradicted CDC policy. In April 2021, the CDC paused the J&J vaccine after reports of blood clots in a few women under 50. No cases were reported among older people, who benefit the most from the vaccine. Since there was a general vaccine shortage at that time, I argued in an op-ed that the J&J vaccine should not be paused for older Americans. This is what got me in trouble. I'm probably the only person ever fired by the CDC for being too pro-vaccine. While the CDC lifted the pause 4 days later, the damage was done. Some older Americans undoubtedly died because of this vaccine pause. Bodily autonomy is not the only argument against COVID vaccine mandates. They are also unscientific and unethical. With a genetic condition called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, which leaves me with a weakened immune system, I had more reason to be personally concerned about COVID than most Harvard professors. I expected that COVID would hit me hard, and that's precisely what happened in early 2021, when the devoted staff at Manchester Hospital in Connecticut saved my life. But it would have been wrong for me to let my personal vulnerability to infections influence my opinions and recommendations as a public health scientist, which must focus on everyone's health. The beauty of our immune system is that those who recover from an infection are protected if and when they are re-exposed. This has been known since the Athenian plague of 430 BC, but it is no longer known at Harvard. 3 prominent Harvard faculty co-authored the now infamous consensus memorandum in The Lancet, questioning the existence of COVID-acquired immunity. By continuing to mandate the vaccine for students with a prior COVID infection, Harvard is de facto denying 2,500 years of science. Since mid-2021, we have known, as one would expect, that COVID-acquired immunity is superior to vaccine-acquired immunity. Based on that, I argued that hospitals should hire, not fire, nurses and other hospital staff with COVID-acquired immunity, since they have stronger immunity than the vaccinated. Vaccine mandates are unethical. The RCTs mainly enrolled young and middle-aged adults, but observational studies showed that COVID vaccines prevented COVID hospitalizations and deaths for older people. Amid a worldwide vaccine shortage, it was unethical to force the vaccine on low-risk students, or those like me who were already immune from having had COVID, while my 87-year-old neighbor and other high-risk people around the world could not get the shot. Any pro-vaccine person should, for this reason alone, have opposed the COVID vaccine mandates. For scientific, ethical, public health, and medical reasons, I objected both publicly and privately to the COVID vaccine mandates. I already had superior infection-acquired immunity, and it was risky to vaccinate me without proper efficacy and safety studies on patients with my type of immune deficiency. This stance got me fired by Mass General Brigham, and consequently fired from my Harvard faculty position. While several vaccine exemptions were given by the hospital, my medical exemption request was denied. I was less surprised that my religious exemption request was denied. Having had COVID disease, I have stronger, longer-lasting immunity than those vaccinated. Lacking scientific rationale, vaccine mandates are religious dogma, and I request a religious exemption from COVID vaccination. If Harvard and its hospitals want to be credible scientific institutions, they should rehire those of us they fired. And Harvard would be wise to eliminate its COVID vaccine mandates for students, as most other universities have already done. Most Harvard faculty diligently pursue truth in a wide variety of fields, but veritas has not been the guiding principle of Harvard leaders, nor have academic freedom, intellectual curiosity, independence from external forces, or concern for ordinary people guided their decisions. Harvard and the wider scientific community have much work to do to deserve and regain public trust. The first steps are the restoration of academic freedom and the canceling of cancel culture. When scientists have different takes on topics of public importance, universities should organize open and civilized debates to pursue the truth. Harvard could have done that, and it still can, if it chooses. Almost everyone now realizes that school closures and other lockdowns were a colossal mistake. Francis Collins has acknowledged his error of singularly focusing on COVID without considering collateral damage to education and non-COVID health outcomes. That's the honest thing to do. And I hope this honesty will reach Harvard. The public deserves it, and academia needs it to restore its credibility. Science cannot survive in a society that does not value truth and strive to discover it. The scientific community will gradually lose public support and slowly disintegrate in such a culture. The pursuit of truth requires academic freedom with open, passionate, and civilized scientific discourse, with zero tolerance for slander, bullying, or cancellation. My hope is that someday Harvard will find its way back to academic freedom and independence. Yeah, I'm really glad I read that. The thing that gets me the most, and he mentioned it several times in this article, is the lack of debates. The lack of debates has been the thing that has really, I have found very notable. We've got a bit of a raid going on Twitch. Good to see you guys. Hello. Arima, Arctic Mule, good to see you both. I'm glad that you're here. Just having a little COVID moment where I do think, and I don't really care where you stand on the COVID issue and what your position really is. I think that we should be able to all agree that it's a bit odd, that it's a touch odd that we are, it's a touch odd that we're not having debates about it. It's a touch odd that people, if in Harvard, that people from Oxford, right, that doctors and nurses are not actually having public debates. That, I think, is actually quite strange. And I've noticed it even at, like, non-academic levels. Very famously, Joe Rogan attempted to organize a debate. He offered $100,000 for people to come and debate this subject, and no takers. I think that that's quite odd. And I do think that there is going to have to be some kind of a reckoning on this issue, that what we need is a truth and reconciliation movement and moment within these institutions to have this conversation about COVID, because people are wounded. I think people are wounded, and that there's a lot of sadness and anger and frustration about what happened during that period of time. Of course, powerful people, Pfizer and Moderna and these organizations, don't really want it to be aired out that they were profiteering during this period of time, which I think is obvious. And so they don't want medical professionals and people who are respected within the industry to actually point out that they're literally just doing these mandates for money. And that's the bottom line on it. So, super glad I read that article, because I think it's important to listen to people who, like, this is not just some guy. This is a person who, while COVID was happening, was a professor of medicine at Harvard. Like, if we're not listening to that, if we're not listening to those people, then I think that we are following a religious ideology. So, let's see what you guys were talking about. Got this Trebek fellow. He's probably long gone. You can't have real science without debate and ability for people to question any of it. And that's when I knew things were really, really wrong with it and all our leaders. Yeah, that's exactly right, my thing. Are we actually going to have the open conversation? Is that ever even going to happen? Yet the epidemiologists agreed COVID evolved so fast that COVID-acquired immunity was useless, didn't apply to the next variant. But this is what I'm saying. Like, did they? Like, I'm just a guy. Like, I don't know anything. In Canada, there was also no way to get an actual exemption, so much for protecting the vulnerable. Capitalism and the bourgeois democracy are to blame, and they can't make science the only criteria for decisions. I mean, yeah, they got to use the profit motive, right? They need money for themselves. That's what really matters. There's no way to have this conversation because capitalism leads to biological warfare and the real reason for lockdown discipline. China will laugh its way through biowar as the USA devolves instantly into zombie apocalypse. Yeah, I could go for a zombie apocalypse right now. Speaking of China, anytime news comes out of China, I think it's worth talking about. CNBC actually publishes like a really interesting, straightforward, like, it's so rare to see from places like CNBC, Fox News, or any of these corporate places, just straightforward reporting. China's housing minister says real estate developers must go bankrupt if necessary. Can you imagine that being said about any organization in the United States? Can you imagine the minister of housing or whatever they call that in the United States, if they're even like the I don't know. Can you imagine the State Department saying something like that in the West? China's struggling real estate developers won't be getting a major bailout. China's authorities have indicated, warning that those who harm the interests of the masses will be punished. For real estate companies that are seriously insolvent and lost the ability to operate, those that must go bankrupt should go bankrupt or be restructured in accordance with the law and market principles. Ni Hong, Minister of Housing and Urban Rural Development, said in a press conference Saturday, "Those who commit acts that harm the interest of the masses will be resolutely investigated and punished in accordance with the law," he said. "They will be made to pay the due price." That's according to a CNBC translation of his Mandarin language remarks published in an official transcript of the press conference held alongside China's annual parliamentary meetings. Ni's comments come as major real estate developers from Evergrande to County Garden have defaulted on their debt, while plunging new home sales have put future business into question. In 2020, Beijing cracked down on developers' high reliance on debt for growth in an attempt to clamp down on property market speculation. But many developers soon ran out of money to finish building apartments, which are typically sold to home buyers in China ahead of completion. Some buyers stopped paying their mortgages in a boycott. Authorities have since announced measures to provide some developers with financing, but the national stance on reducing the role of real estate in the economy hasn't changed. This year's annual government gathering has emphasized the country's focus on investing in and building up high-end manufacturing capabilities. In contrast, the leadership has not mentioned the massive real estate sector as much. Real estate barely came up during the press conference focused on the economy last week, while Ni was speaking during a meeting that focused on people's livelihoods. Ni said authorities would promote housing sales and the development of affordable housing, while emphasizing the need to consider the longer term. Near-term changes in the property sector have significant impact on China's overall economy. Real estate was once about 25% of China's GDP, when including related sectors such as construction. UBS Analysis estimated late last year that property now accounts for about 22% of the economy. Last week, Premier Li Qiang said his government work report in that year ahead, China would move faster to foster a new development model for real estate. We will scale up the building and supply of government-subsidized housing and improve the basic systems for commodity housing to meet people's essential need for a home to live in and their different demands for better housing, an English-language version of the report said. So, usually what happens when capitalists see this kind of stuff is they go, oh, it's a collapse in China and everything's horrible and all this kind of... It's like, no, it's a collapse of your dumb capitalist systems. That's what it is. It's a collapse of the systems, the private equity systems and the private controlled systems that China has permitted in its borders. And when they collapse, the Chinese go, yeah, those systems collapse, and we're going to take them over and we're going to run them ourselves. Now, China is oddly both more capitalist and more communist. I mean, that's kind of the thing. China's position, and I've had several conversations about this fairly recently, and it's pretty clear to me that what's going on in the left generally is that there's this purity culture. There's this desire to say, well, Marx said that communism is this. This is communism. So I have a vision of communism. And then to take that vision of communism, layer it onto a society and say, aha, they are not matching my vision of what communism should be. Therefore, they are not communist in any way. 0% communist, right? Because it's a purity culture. So if there's even 1% of the society that's capitalist, then it's 100% capitalist because it's a purity culture. And once you actually begin to investigate Chinese history and see what China's choices were and take it more seriously, it gets very difficult to hold that position, I think. Because China really had the choice between war or this economic... It had to choose its battleground. And its battleground could have either been military, right? Which is kind of what the Maoist position is, right? Just fight a war with guns and weapons and bombs, right? And communism will eventually win. Or fight an economic war. Don't fight a military war. Fight an economic war. And when you're fighting an economic war, you have to give ground. And you have to be realistic. And you have to make concessions. And I think that China has made that choice. And it's working. And it's obviously working. And now we're entering a period of time where China has developed itself so that it is considered at least as strong an economy as the American economy. And it's able to leverage that strength, and it's able to do things that it wasn't previously able to do. And it's really scaring the Western capitalists. And there's going to be a diverging point in China. Is China going to become the capitalist shithole kind of place that Western Marxists seem to think it's going to do, or is it going to continue its project of moving towards communism? Are they being honest with that or not? And only time can really tell. But when I take a look at it, it's looking to me as though China is being very honest about what capitalism is. They seem to have a better sense of what the system of capital actually is than Westerners. And I think that really comes down to that they are fundamentally Marxists, that they understand what the system of capital is. They understand what its trajectory is. They know what its goals are. They understand that. And so the analogy that I have used in the past, and that I will continue to use, is that China understands that capitalism is like a fire. And that if you have a fire in a fireplace and you interact with it with tools, with safety, and the understanding that it needs to be in the fireplace, then it can heat your house and cook food, and it's useful. But fire is going to act as fire is going to act. And if you open up the fireplace and let the fire out of the fireplace, it's going to do exactly what you think it's going to do. So the Chinese don't do that. And when fire acts in the manner that they expect it to act, well, they have thoughts and plans for how to deal with that. Like, if somebody comes along and says, hey, I think I can make a lot of progress if we just let the fire out of the fireplace in this one section. Here, how about I have a house over here, China, and this house will be in your jurisdiction, and we'll let the fire go in this house. And the Chinese will go, okay, very good. Well, you're making wealth for us, and you're making prosperity for us, but your house is going to burn down. And capitalists seem to think that it's not going to go that way. Capitalists, because they're following a religious pursuit and not a scientific pursuit, they seem to think that it's not going to go down that way. And capitalism is the greatest engine for human success and growth, and blah, 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 yabba, yabba, yabba. And so the house eventually burns down. And then the capitalist turns to the government and says, oh, you need to bail me out. And the government goes, no, we don't. Like, we're under no obligation to do that. You let a fire go in your house and it burnt down. So, tough shit for you. And I think that this dynamic is heavily misunderstood, not only by capitalists, but also by Western Marxists. That the Chinese understand what capitalism is. They understand why they've had to allow capitalism into its borders. They understand what they're up to and what they're doing. And they're not bending the knee to the system of capital. They're accommodating it in lieu of military conflict, in the hopes that they'll be able to one day have a strong enough force that they will be unassailable. That's the point, right? Like, that's the whole objective and the whole point. And I feel like that's primarily misunderstood by the West. What do I want to put up here? Yeah, four key industries are at the top of the market. These are Chinese industries: aircraft, EV. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, though. Like, the system of capital. And look, it makes all the sense in the world. If you take a functioning system that's designed to produce something, and then you take a small group of parasites and you attach them to the side of it, well, that's going to be worse. It's just going to be worse, right? So, of course, systems that don't have these parasites attached to the side of it are going to be more effective. They don't have parasites, right? And the benefits turn around and go into the pockets of the people actually doing the work. So, of course, those people are going to want to be more productive, and of course they're going to want to do more effort, and of course they're going to put more into it. Because when they do, they actually receive the benefits of those results, and they don't just get siphoned off into the pockets of some people they've never met. Like, it's a very straightforward process. And just because it doesn't 100% meet the merit of the vision of a Western Marxist who's just now read Marx, doesn't actually know anything about China, doesn't know anything about its history, well, it doesn't mean anything. That's what I kind of find so startling about what's going on with Western Marxists today. Uh, uh, is that they seem to have this idea that me, as somebody who's never experienced a revolution, who's living in the imperial core, who's never seen an overthrow, who's never experienced any of this, knows more about how to enact a revolution than those who are currently enacting a revolution. And it really pays to remember that Fidel Castro said of Xi Jinping that he was one of the most dedicated revolutionaries he'd ever met. Like, China's path to enacting an actual socialist or communist ideal, I think, is the best that anybody can be doing right now once you actually factor in the reality of the United States military and the Vietnam War and the Laos War, the Cambodian War, the Korean War. Like, this is a real thing that happened. And I don't know why I'm supposed to ignore it. So I think that once you accept the reality of the imperial war machine, you can understand what China's position is with a lot more clarity. With the Boeing incidents, which this company is too big to fail, American company, yeah, this has led to a jump in preference to Chinese producers. The EV market was expanded through trade with Russia and the oil deal. Like, look, China's just building stuff. Like, this is the thing that I think is just not really understood. Is like when I was like 15, I was like, we should be building solar panels. We should be researching solar panels. We should be doing solar panel technology. We should be doing that. Like, it's crazy that we're not. And of course, the response I got was like, well, research costs money and there's no incentive and all this kind of stuff. And it was like, almost right away, I was like, this is a stupid way to think about this. Like, we should do it because it should be done. And that should be like very clear and obvious. And then along comes China and it's like, yeah, you know what we should do is we should take like a whole group of people and just jam them into a room and tell them, research solar power. Just do it. Like, no, we don't need no profit motive garbage. Like, this is something that we think should be done, and so let's do it. Now, where are we at? China is the absolute dominant leader in the solar technology sector. So much so that we will 100% be buying Chinese-made solar panels for 100 years. Like, we're not going to develop those solar panels. We're not going to make any of that kind of stuff. That's not going to happen, right? We're not competing with these people because you can't compete with them. That's the thing that always kind of baffled me when I was growing up. I would always suggest, like, hey, we should make a crown corporation or do this. And the response I would get from business owners was like, well, then we couldn't compete with them. Like, okay. So you're just admitting that your model is inferior and that we should do away with it. I don't care about your pocketbook. Like, I don't give a shit about your weird little kooky ideology about how things should work. If you're telling me that we can erect a system that is superior, works better, is more efficient, and is more equitable for the people who are interacting with it, then we should do that. Like, but we're so bonkers and backwards in our kooky little religious ideology. Has a new bookshelf. What are your thoughts on critics who blame China's leadership for allowing workers being overworked? World Workshop benefiting off scabbing, all of these sorts of things. I mean, look, these things are definitely going to exist in every society that's ever existed. And it's certainly going to exist in one that has allowed a certain degree of capitalist infection, if you like, into it. I'm I think it pays to remember that the way that the Chinese are viewing what is going on is that they are fighting a war. Like, I really just don't think that Western capitalists and Marxists, that Westerners generally respect that at all. That the Chinese people and the Chinese government and the Chinese businesses are looking at what's going on as an unfolding struggle, as if it is a war. That sure, there's this exploitation that happens. Sure, there are these issues that occur. That's what happens when you're fighting a war. And that the goal is to steadily eliminate that from the society over time through this struggle. And there are systems in China to facilitate that. So, for example, the Chinese constitution says that if a business is of a certain size, it has to have a workers' council, right? So that basically means that unions are built in to the business structure. That if you want to have a business and you want to have 1,000 employees, well, guess what? You've got a workers' council. And there is something to be said about just things that are cultural, right? Like that culturally people have a work ethic, and culturally people want to do more, because they understand that they're in this moment of building prosperity. This is one thing that I think also, we're so used to living in a failed society that is collapsing that we can't even really perceive or understand what it would be like and what it must be like to actually live in a society that is actually building, right? Like, really imagine that you are living in a society and within the space of 4 years, entire cities are built around you. Like, in the space of 10 years, just really imagine what that must be like to live in a place where huge, enormous, massive scale projects are just being built all the time, constantly. That your educational systems are literally training you, saying to you as you are being trained, there are 600,000 kilometers of high-speed rail that are being built, and we need people to build them, design them, and be part of that project. There it is. You definitely have 100% a job. How do we know? Because here's the plans that we can show you for what it is we're going to do, right? Compare that to what we do in this like free market entrepreneurial dumb bullshit where we're like, just follow your dreams. It'll all work out. Oh, your degree is obsolete the moment you get it. Oh, you better retrain. Just learn to code, bro. Like, we are so used to living in an obvious, straightforward, failed society that is not attempting to find its feet and rectify its failings at all. And so when we look at a society that is very obviously building, that is very obviously expanding, that is very obviously improving the quality of life for its own citizens, that's very obviously accelerating the rate of its own production, hand over fist, we don't really understand those people. Because we're so used to our society just being a complete failure. We don't understand that, like, yeah, people are willing to work their asses off if they think that what they're doing is going to be successful, or if they think that what they're doing is going to improve the nation that they live in. There is national pride, and there is familial pride, and there's a hope for building a better future, and there is all of this kind of stuff. And they understand that, like, obviously they understand that now is the moment. Now is the moment to strike while the iron's hot. And they're doing it. Has a New Bookshelf continues, but since China got so prosperous, can't it just funnel to overworked and exploited in the process to stop the overwork exploitive practices from going on? I mean, I would argue that that's what they're doing, right? Like, I'd argue that what we're seeing is that process that is unfolding. Like, you're not going to be able to flip a switch and see that happen. But like, I'll give you a clear example. So Hawaii, for example, when they hand out the surplus value that they get, they don't give it to shareholders, and it doesn't go to the state. It goes to the workers, right? So that is one mechanism, a very clear mechanism, by which the system is saying, hey, if you work in these enterprises and you are a worker and you're serious at it and you're here to do it, we will reward you. And it is a guarantee. Like, you're going to get the benefits of your own labor for sure. And so I just think that there is an element of people who understand that and understand that, oh, I'm going to work my fucking ass off. Like, if I was working and living in a society and in a system that actually did say, oh, you worked extra hard, here's extra more, then I would work extra hard. But I don't. I live in a failed society that just is here to extract my surplus value while reducing my wage as fast as possible. Right? So there's no point to work extra hard. There's no point to put in any extra effort. There's no point. You should do the least amount you possibly can get away with 100% of the time, because they're not going to pay you extra. You're not going to get more. And everybody should be working to abandon the job that they're in to try to find a better job that pays them a higher wage, so you can work at that minimum level for the most that you can possibly get. Right? Because this is an antagonistic society that's fighting against itself and isn't interested in rectifying any of that, while other societies are literally just going... So I think a lot of what you're seeing is cultural, that people are willing to accept a certain degree of what we would consider exploitation or overwork or any of that kind of stuff because they see a trajectory of success. That if they wanted to slow down and if they wanted to do... Like, there's a movement in China called the Lie Flat movement, which is this idea that, like, the society that we have and this work culture that we have, is it actually benefiting us? And maybe we should rethink and all of that. And that exists in China for sure, because they are people just as we are people, and there are people constantly questioning these ideas and these thoughts. But I'm very sympathetic to a person living in a society where there's obviously this huge amount of upward momentum going on, being like, now's the time. Like, now is the time. Like, I'm 20 years old. I'm coming fresh out of school. Maybe I'm just about to come out of school with a university degree or something. There's these huge projects. Everything's going crazy. I want a house. I want a family. I want to be prosperous. I want to spread my legacy into the future forever and all that kind of stuff. Go, 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 go. Now, for sure. For sure. And it's like the promise that capitalism gave us, but it's actually being delivered on because you can see it. It's like we were told that that's how things were going to be in this capitalist society, but it was a total farce. It was an absolute bullshit lie, obviously. But if I was living in a society where it was actually happening, and I could see that it was actually happening, yeah, yeah, work, fucking go. Like, go, for sure. Like, so I don't have any disrespect whatsoever for somebody who is going to live in whatever society that they're in that holds that kind of idea of they want to go and be productive and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's fine. But, like, we don't live in a society that actually supports that ethos outside of its rhetoric, right? Like, we live in a society that extracts value and plasticizes people as efficiently and as effectively as they possibly can. Has a New Bookshelf continues, would you ever react to anarchist critiques of China? I struggle with anarchist critiques generally, because I do find that anarchists just kind of want to get to the no state section, and I'm like, I don't really know that I take that very seriously. Like, I like the vision, I like the idea, I like the thinking, I like all of that, but there isn't really much by way of A to B. Like, they want to be at Z. I'm like, okay, cool, we're at A. So there's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P, all the way down the line. How do you get to those steps? And they don't seem really interested in having that conversation. That there's just going to be some kind of general overthrow, and then all the pieces will come in because everybody's nice. I just don't know that I take that very seriously. I do. That said, I admire anarchists because I think anarchists are there to keep communists honest. That the communist argument is always, we'll take control of the state as the proletariat, and then we will begin enacting the project of communism and moving the society towards communism through the levers of the state. And that includes the idea of eventually having the state wither away, which I think is a very pro-anarchist position, that the anarchists would like to see the state go away. But anarchists typically want to see the state just go away, just poof, and the state is gone, as if by magic. Whereas communists want the state to steadily wither away and become less and less impactful in the society until finally people don't even really care that it's there or see that it's necessary, and it doesn't really have power in people's lives on the day-to-day any longer. And so I think anarchists exist and are there to continuously put pressure on communists to move in that direction. But I don't think that you could have a successful anarchist project because of the nature of imperial capital. I just don't see it as a legitimate, serious path for that reason. Communists want the state to control, abuse, and exert power upon them. I mean, communists acknowledge that the purpose of the state is to inflict a policy to dominate one, to exert control from one group over the other, and that right now the control is the capitalist, what they call what communists call the dictatorship of capital. And that the idea is to take control of the state so that it becomes a dictatorship of the proletariat. And through that process, we eliminate the capitalist class. So you're not incorrect. Like, communists want to exert control over capitalists very, very clearly. And I actually think that that's necessary, because capitalists are not going to just see the state get overthrown and then be like, oops, I guess we lost. Well, doop, doop, doop. We're going to just give you the means of production, and we're just going to hand that all over. Yippity bobbity boobity boo. That's not how that's going to work at all. Right? Like, capitalists are going to fight. They're going to turn full fascist. They're going to go completely nuts. They're not going to just watch it happen. Mixel says, communists, we don't like the bourgeoisie, so let's take all their power and move to one, well, we already have one single state that eventually becomes so powerful and authoritarian. Transferring that power is a wrong move. We should neutralize it. I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but how do you think you're going to neutralize it? Like, you literally have a system of imperial capital that has an incredible war machine that they use regularly. And you're just, how do you think you're actually going to neutralize that? Like, for real. Like, what's your plan? Because, like, my plan is that we organize ourselves with the intention of taking control of the state and using the state against the capitalists, while simultaneously following a policy of depowering the state over time while we depower the system of capital. But, like, the idea that you could just, like, flip a switch and suddenly say no more state. Okay, well, what are you going to do about the imperial capitalists hiring private armies? Like, what are you going to do about that? It doesn't seem like there's any serious... Like, this is my major critique of Western Marxists generally today. Like, they don't seem to be aware that war is real and that it exists and that there's a long history of war. That for some reason, Westerners seem to think that they will be immune to war. That it's kind of like during the January 6th insurrection, right? So during the January 6th insurrection, there were all of these people who stormed the Capitol building and then thought that they were going to be able to get on planes and go home. And were like surprised that there was a response. Was surprised that the system was like, we literally have you on camera breaking windows at the Capitol building and like storming the Capitol building with weapons. You're under arrest. And we've got footage of these people being like, I can't believe, what are you, they can't just compute that there's like a response, that nobody would arrest me. The face-eating leopard would not eat my face, surely. Like, war exists. Capitalists have a powerful, large-scale military that they use regularly to get what they want, and they're going to use it on you. Like, and oftentimes when I see people talking about overthrow of the state and all this kind of stuff, it's like, okay, but what are you going to do about the 1,000 men that are going to show up with weapons and destroy your revolution? What are you going to do about that? And the answer I get almost every single time is, well, we need to organize, and what they describe as an organization of a state. I'm like, well, then fucking just do it then. Just have your state. And just say that that's what you're going to do. Because the response from the capitalist class is obvious. They're not going to just give up. And it's better to simply just have the plan of, and a plan that everybody understands, of using state power in order to prevent capitalists from fighting back against you effectively. It's a nice idea to say that we'll just neutralize the state. Well, how are you going to do that? What are you even talking about? What are you even talking about? Capitalists are going to look at you neutralizing your state and be like, oh, let's just take our private military and just walk in. Okay. We did it. Capitalists are here now. Because that's what they're going to do. Like, Eric Gardner is not going to just watch your revolution happen and then be like, oh, I guess we lost, guys. Everybody put down your guns and your weapons and your jeeps and your trucks and your tanks and your jets and your bombs. The people have spoken. They neutralized their state, and so we too also as a private military are neutralized. It's just not how it's going to go. Like, it's just not how it's going to go. They're going to go in there and they're going to blow the place up. Like, have I seen Re-Education? They are an ANCOM who talks about the anarchist state. I haven't seen this specifically, but, and again, like, when I listen to anarchists talk about their vision of what a country should look like and be structured and the pieces of it, I find myself bobbing along and being like, yeah, makes sense. Makes all the sense in the world. Yep. It's the getting there. Right? Like it's all well and good. Like, I can dream about Star Trek too. Right? I can talk about how the future of Star Trek and the Star Trekian reality of gallivanting through space, and we'll have replicators and teleporters, and oh my god, it'll be okay, great. I can have that kind of like fantasy role play vision crafting too. How do you get there? What's the process? And because we're not all just going to have a talk about it and agree and then do it. It's just not what's going to happen. Like, yeah, Eric Prince, Blackwater founder, talks about the U.S. colonizing South America and Africa, as if he loves what Zionist entity is doing. Yeah. No, Eric Prince very famously said within the last couple of weeks that we just need to go full imperialist. Like, we need to go full colonizer. And he said those words. Like, he didn't imply it. He said straight up, like, we've got, like, he took his mask off, and he said that we just need to go full ham. Like, the man is an obvious Nazi, a complete psychopath, without a doubt. And the idea that we're going to neutralize the state and men like him will just lay down their guns, like, it's just not a real thing. Here's an article. Oh, Snake said something earlier that I hope you're still here, Snake. He said that I was reading good articles. I'm like, yeah, thanks, bud. I appreciate that. Here's one that I found. I don't actually know who this is. I just kind of dug this one up. But it's so thorough and it's so unique and it's so interesting that I feel like I have to look at it. And so I'm gonna. The sorry state of class consciousness in capitalist Canada. Most people believe they are part of a mythical middle class that doesn't really exist. Canada is a strong contender for the least class-aware society on the planet. It's stiff competition, but I think we have a good shot at the title. We very rarely think, let alone talk about social class, which is virtually absent from the mainstream discourse. According to the recent Great Canadian Class Survey, only 7% of respondents thought social class was an important factor to individual success, and 7 out of 10 felt little to no attachment to their class identity. So what is the state of class consciousness in Canada? To find out, we'll explore some survey data to get a baseline of how most people think about class in Canada. Today, we are focused not on the objective, but the subjective side of social class. The subjective aspect of class encompasses how people think about, understand, and experience the class structure of society and their place in it. Sometimes this subjective aspect accords well to social reality, but as we shall see, more often it does not. A situation that has been described as false consciousness. There is a lot to dig into on the subjective side of class. For the time being, let's start with self-rated social class, often just called subjective class in the social sciences, meaning people's judgment of their own position in the class structure of society. Measuring subjective social class with survey data. Despite the lack of importance Canadian society places on class, many of the nation's major opinion polling firms have conducted survey research on the topic in recent years, often framed by a sense of collective panic over the perceived middle-class decline. Pollsters have taken to directly asking people if they see themselves as middle class. Consistently, 7 or 8 out of 10 people say they believe they belong to the middle class. Of course, this pointed form of question practically primes people to place themselves in the middle class. Actually, nearly all mainstream discourse on class encourages people to think of themselves as middle class. The short version of prevailing class thinking in Canada is that a majority of people believe they are middle class, that everyone around them is middle class, and that we all live in a middle class society where so-called middle class values reign. Class policies have been restricted almost entirely to empty appeals to the middle class, while much class analysis is reduced to fretting over the maladies of the middle class. In conventional models of class, we commonly see variations of the low, middle, upper scheme that basically deny the existence of the working class. In the 2016 cycle of the General Social Survey, where such a scheme is used, respondents nearly unanimously, 95%, declared themselves to be middle class. Even among the lowest income earners in the country, nearly 90% of people thought they were in the middle class. Given the obvious negative connotation of low class, and the fact that almost nobody considers themselves to be upper class, people are naturally encouraged to see themselves as middle class. Nearly all GSS respondents say they are middle class. Under $25,000. They've got this all broken down. 55%. If you're earning under $25,000, you think you're middle class. 55%, a majority. If you're earning, and then conversely, if you're earning $125,000, it's still 57%. So the lowest this goes is 55%, and then the next lowest is at the highest quintile, $125,000, 57%. And then everybody else, the people who are actually closer to the middle, of course, are wider. And of course, the people who are under 25,000 have a larger percentage. So there's a certain amount of realism that exists within the conversation, but Canadians are cooked, yeah. Recognizing the working class makes a difference. Survey researchers have long known that people can be prompted to judge their own class position and perhaps the nature of class in our society in different ways based on how the question is posed. When people are asked to rate their class position in an open-ended way, meaning they are free to answer in their own words, they tend to fall back into dominant ideas about class by default. When asked in this manner, nearly everyone says they are in the middle class, while very few see themselves as with the working class on their own initiative. Commonly, people either won't know their class position without prompting, or outright deny the existence of social class. When people are asked about their own class position with a closed type of question, the response pattern changes substantially. In a closed question, rather than asking participants to answer freely, they are asked to place themselves on a pre-made class scale of hierarchy. Depending on how they are built, these class scales can prompt people to think about the class structure of society, not something most people do often or ever, in particular ways. When asked a closed question about their subjective social class, a smaller majority of people still think they are middle class. However, when the class scale includes the working class as a response option, a significant minority of people will consider themselves to be working class rather than middle class. The chart below shows the results of a series of experimental surveys comparing the differences in response patterns between closed and open-ended questions about subjective social class. Participants were nearly 2.5 times more likely to say they were part of the working class when they were prompted with a class scale that allowed them to choose between working and middle class. Just acknowledging the existence of the working class, not something that happens very often, and suggesting that one could be part of it, prompts people to think differently about their class position. Open-ended is the yellow, closed. That is very interesting. In the following chart, we can see the collected results of surveys on social class conducted in more recent years, which also gave respondents an option of saying they are working class. As expected, a majority of respondents to each survey rated themselves as middle class. Yet, if given the option, a sizable minority of people in Canada will rate themselves as working class, whatever that means to them. Several polls have found that a third, 33% or more of respondents thought that they were in the working class, while others found a much lower rate of working class self-ID at under 1/5, 20% of the population. Most likely, the cause of this discrepancy in subjective class is the scale offered by the latter surveys, which split the middle class up into multiple parts. Putting a lower bound on the middle class makes the distinction between the working class and middle class even more porous. In such cases, many who might otherwise view themselves as working class are invited to consider themselves lower middle class instead. In effect, working class and middle class subjective class positions have a negative relationship, meaning when one goes up, the other goes down, at least when considering a closed class scale where respondents can only give a single answer. These are the people that responded working class. These are the people that responded middle class. Dude, this is actually really, really interesting. I don't believe in this concept of middle class. I think that separating people, this is a tactic that is used by the capitalist class to divide the working class up, to pretend as though that there are different tiers. When the reality is if you are earning $70,000, you have much more in common to the homeless person that's on the street than you do to the capitalist. Like you are closer to being homeless than you are to being the owner of an industry. We can view the negative relationship between the two class positions unfolding over time in the result of the World Values Survey, which shows a marked decline in working class identification over time, from a little under 1/3 in 2000 down to less than 1/5 of the population by 2020. As we see in the chart, the share of people that consider themselves lower middle class has grown considerably, and mainly at the expense of the working class share. The powerful role middle class thought plays in service of the status quo, crowding out working class consciousness like weeds in an ideological garden. Working class consciousness in Canada hits new lows. Income, education, occupation, and subjective class. Conventionally, class is treated as some function of income, education, and occupation. These things don't constitute social class, but do clearly influence how people think about class and their own class position. We can use microdata from the World Values Survey to explore how these variables impact subjective social class. Virtually nobody willingly identifies as upper class. In the latest WVS wave, only about 1% of the population did so. About 1/10 of people at the top of the income distribution. Nearly all of Canada's top income earners, however, which probably includes some small-time millionaires as it does the South, say they are part of the middle class, specifically the upper middle class. There is a well-known tendency studied by psychologists and sociologists for wealthy people to underestimate and downplay their relative class position and advantages. This is another ideological function of conventional class thinking, blurring class distinctions at the top, not just at the bottom, of the class hierarchy. Really, the aim is to erase the dividing lines of class entirely. If there is one group of people in the country that does overwhelmingly do not see themselves as middle class, it is low-wage workers and those with low incomes in general. In the bottom 30% of the income distribution, only 3 in 10 people see themselves as middle class and are equally likely to view themselves as either working or lower class. Since there is no accepted definition of the lower class, it isn't clear, from this data at least, why so many of those people would view themselves as being separate from the working class. The relationship between people's self-rated class position and education level was weaker than with income. Respondents were less likely to rate themselves as working class as education rose, but a majority of people across all levels of education still believed that they were in the middle class. Workers in service, semi-skilled, and unskilled occupations were much more likely than most to say they were part of the working class. Yet a majority of Canadian workers across all occupations saw themselves as part of the middle class, with the exception of unskilled workers, who are roughly split down the middle. Unsurprisingly, those in higher management, professional and technical occupations were especially unlikely to view themselves as working class. Here's your what they call unskilled worker. If you've never had a job. Semi-skilled worker, it's about a 50-50 split. And then, of course, higher administrative, you're more likely to view yourself in the upper middle. There are a few interesting findings related to employment status as well. A majority of people self-rated in the middle class regardless of employment status, with the exception of the unemployed. The closer one gets to being a full-time employee, the lower the likelihood of self-rating as working class. Part-time workers and students rated themselves as working class a bit more than average. Both the unemployed, as well as homemakers that provide unpaid domestic labor, displayed a much stronger affinity to the working class than most employed workers. Make of it what you will. Viewing the world through a distorted lens. While we are only discussing survey responses here, these findings strongly suggest that people's thinking about class in general can be quite malleable and often contradictory. Consider the results of the Polaris survey, which found that a majority of respondents, people could agree or disagree with multiple statements, said that both middle class, 78%, and working class, 63%, accurately described their social and financial position in society. It is as though most working class people, in terms of their subjective social class, have one foot in reality and another in the mythical and ethereal realm of the middle class. They can be prompted by any number of factors, probably far beyond the context of survey research, to reconsider their class position in either way. As we conventionally understand it, the middle class is an ideological construction of capitalist society, a lens that distorts the view of social reality. So it is by design a vague and diffuse concept, offering a little bit of something and a seat at the table to just about everyone. While most people agree that being middle class is mostly a function of income, they also place strong importance on things that make them feel middle class, like having a comfortable lifestyle, feeling financially secure, or believing that one will be rewarded for hard work. Many of the signposts guiding people to the middle class on a gut level are vague, non-specific, highly subjective, often contradictory individual feelings and notions. Supposedly objective measures of social class fare no better. Across 12 commonly used income-based definitions of middle class, over 90% of households in the United States could be classified as such on at least one. The same could, of course, be said of Canada. When participants in a Quebec study on social class were asked what they thought the minimum level of income that grants entry into the middle class was, the resounding answer was essentially incomes that are close to my income, regardless of how much their income actually was. In terms of income, people often take middle class to be average, and in turn based on the people they know and encounter on a daily basis, also judge themselves to be average, and therefore in the middle class, just like everyone else. So whether measured in objective or subjective terms, nobody really seems to agree on what middle class means, let alone what the criteria for entry and exit are. This is not evidence of a broken concept. This is ideology working as intended. Canada's class unconsciousness in international contexts. Of all the countries included in the 7th cycle of the World Values Survey from 2017 to 2020, there was nowhere that more of the population rated their own class position as middle class than in Canada. Compared to Canada, only 2 countries in the world did a smaller portion of respondents say they are working class. In reality, the majority of people in Canada, indeed the world, are working class or undergoing proletariization in the process of becoming working class. The middle class does exist, but it is a small minority of people that includes those that live on both labor and capital income. Small-time capitalists, some self-employed, and also some, but not all people, like managers, professionals, intellectuals, and very highly paid workers. That is not most people who believe they are middle class. The inevitable conclusion, which probably comes as a shock to no one, is that Canada is one of the least class-conscious societies in the world. Straight up middle class, working class, Canada, Czechia, Mongolia, Thailand, United States. The Philippines. The Philippines has less responsive working class, and Nigeria. So when it comes to class consciousness, we're about as good as Nigeria. Why is class consciousness in Canada so far gone? One could write a dozen dissertations and only scratch the surface, but there is time to briefly touch on a few points. First up is that the ideological construct of the middle class has a deep connection to the dominant ideology of liberalism that pervades daily life under capitalism. So the omnipresence of middle-class thinking reflects the strength of capitalist ideological domination over Canadian society, which is to say very strong. Beyond that, sociologists and historians have connected the low and contradictory state of working-class consciousness to Canada's historical development and current structure as a settler capital state based on white supremacy. Further, in the 20th century in Canada, there was actually a deliberate campaign to promote middle-class values, especially among new immigrants, as some sort of Cold War inoculation against communism. As for changes since the start of the 21st century, there is likely connection to home ownership in the bubble era. Typically, a home is the only asset of value any working-class person will ever own. Increasingly, homeowners are pushed to treat homes as financial assets, tapping their home equity for billions of dollars in credit and loans. This has, possibly, produced a type of pseudo-entrepreneurial orientation among many homeowners to the asset value of their own homes, which dovetails easily into the dominant middle-class ideology. This guy's name, Ryan Romard. He's a sociologist and research analyst. Pretty good article. And I think the reason I was attracted to reading it is because I never see this subject discussed. So this guy is actually delving into some interesting data. And I think at the end, I see where he's going with his conclusion. And I think that I would use stronger language than this. He's correct in order. He's correct that he connects this thinking to an ideology, but he's not willing to go as far as I'm willing to go, which is that it's a religious ideology. That it's not simply an ideology, that we have entered a very clear religious ideology space, and that religious ideology has a doctrine and a dogma. And I think that's mainly where it's coming from. When I think about it, from the three pillars, right? That if you were to say that you were not middle class, right? So if you were to say you're working class, or if you're to say that you're lower class, or if you're to say that you're in these other positions, then that is an acknowledgement of personal failure, right? In a heavily individualized world, you want to feel as though you are in an acceptable position, and middle class has become that acceptable position. If you say, "Oh, I'm of the middle class," then that means that you're a successful person in the capitalist society, regardless of what reality actually is. Yeah, even NDP has to make idiotic appeals to ordinary Canadians or everyday Canadians to avoid saying working. Yeah, and I think that it's telling that we don't actually have a socialist party anymore in Canada. We don't actually have any organization that's actually saying like working class, socialist values, any of that kind of stuff. Like it's completely gone from our discourse. I think it's purposeful, right? Yeah, it's an I'm all right, Jack threshold to say you are middle. Yeah. It's like self-reported dick size. Eggs D, cutting to the heart of the matter. Yeah. Everyone wants to feel good about themselves. And so saying like I'm in the middle class means I'm just like everybody else, regardless as to whether or not that's true or not. And I think that that has something to do with why there's a lot of people at the wealthy side of things that still call themselves middle class, because there's a sense of guilt, I think, that pervades them. They don't want to say, oh, I'm so much better off than a person who's homeless living on the streets. Uh, uh, I also think that in a funny way, it's really useful for capitalists to maintain, or not in a funny way, but in a very real way. Guys, I'm sorry I'm like itching my nose all the time. It's just gotten really itchy. It's crazy. Yeah. Just Me writes, I live in legislated poverty. Yeah, and I think a lot of people are living in legislative poverty, and it's very funny that a person who is on disability has a income cap, but a billionaire doesn't. And what middle class really achieves is that it allows us to discuss the realities that there are different um, income brackets and that people live in different kind of positions without actually discussing the source of that. That the point of a class discussion is to discuss the ownership class versus the working class. And that's the distinction that actually matters the most in the society. That's what's generating everything. That's what's creating the antagonistic relationships that exist in our society. But by having a conversation about middle class, it allows you to have that class discussion without actually having a meaningful discussion of the existence of capitalists. And so you can still exist in this, oh, you just need to work hard. Just work hard and you'll climb the meritocracy kind of level of talking. If you want to get up out of the lower class, then you just need to work harder, right? If you want to be part of the upper class, say, oh yeah, you just need to work harder, right? It's all about your own personal energy and your own personal initiative, because the subject of class has itself been individualized. You're not actually living in a reality that says, no, you sell yourself for wages, because nobody wants to think of themselves as a wage slave. No one wants to actually accept the hard reality of the society that they live in, which is that you sell yourself for wages. That's what you are doing. That's what most of us are doing. And if you're not doing that, then you're probably of the capitalist class, because that's the actual distinction that exists in the society, that there's a small group of owners who we sell ourselves to for wages. And this conversation of middle class allows us to discuss wealth and discuss the disparities in incomes without actually discussing actual class dynamic. Jib Jabby writes, keep speaking your truth, John. You have inspired me to start taking action. Fantastic. That's what it's all about, baby. That's what it's all about. Like, that's the reason I do this. And I will continue to do this. Because I see myself, and I used to kind of joke about this, but more and more I come to see it as just a fact of my position in all of this, is that I'm like Merlin up in all of this. I'm the voice in the wilderness. I'm just a guy who has been alienated by the system of capital, who has a limited power, who has a limited connection, who has limited potential in regards to having an impact on the ground. But I know what's going on, and I know, and I can see what I can see, and I can organize the best that I can in my own community. But my role is to tell it as it is, and to hope that others will hear that and begin to be inspired in order to organize the best they can in their own environment. Working on building out a playlist to bring people into class consciousness. Absolutely. At this stage in the game, it all counts. Create art, create music, create anything. Do anything you can at this stage in the game. Grow a garden. Every single little thing counts. I think that's important to hear, and I think it's important to know. Because I know for myself, I can get very down on myself. I can get myself in a position where I'm like, oh, I'm just not, what am I even doing? I'm not even achieving anything. What's the purpose? What's the point? What, this small little thing isn't going to move the needle. Why even try and why even bother? And I'm here today to tell you that every little tiny action counts. Every little fraction of energy that you are putting in that is anti-capitalist, that moves against the system of capital, that organizes against the system of capital and encourages people to think outside the system of capital counts. Every single little bit of it counts. And we need as much of it as we can get at this stage in the game. We need as much of it as we can get. Because as the system decays and declines, and as it stops responding to the needs of the people, a lot of the society are going to swing to the right. And they're going to swing to the right dramatically. They're going to swing to the right dramatically. And we need people who are willing to stand firm and stand strong on what we know to be true, which is that the system of capital is itself the culprit. It's the system of capital is what we need to keep our focus on. That is the true antagonistic force in the society. John the Baptist vibes. Oh, I guess that means I get to meet Jesus Christ at some point. I hope that happens. I wouldn't mind that. Be like, hey guys, I found Jesus Christ. Lou, middle class is just a Hoomer dog whistle? I don't know what Hoomer, who, am I just missing it? What's Hoomer? Like, I just think it's a tool being used by the system of capital so that people can have some kind of discussion about wealth disparity or societal position without actually having a serious conversation about class. Home-owning boomer. Got it. Yeah, and I think there's a good amount of in-grouping with it too, right? Everybody wants to be like in the in-group, and everybody wants to believe that they're doing well. And people don't want to acknowledge and certainly say out loud and certainly live in a space where they can actually acknowledge what's going on in the society. I think it's hard for people to do that. Like, most people want to believe that the society is going to work for them. And most people, that's why I think it's easy for people to get gaslit and get conned into this belief system that says, oh, you are where you are because you didn't work hard enough. It's all your fault. You're the problem. If only you had have done this, if only you had have done that. And it preys on a person's natural inclination to be self-critical. Because people are self-critical, naturally. Our consciousness will spit out moments at us where we acted like a dumbass all the time. You'll literally just be standing there, and then something will come into your brain that's like, hey, remember that thing you did when you were 12? Hey, remember when you were 23 and you said some dumb shit? Remember that? And so it's easy to prey on that. It's easy to prey on people's feelings of needing to be self-critical. And to pretend as though everything that happens in your life is your fault, that you have a superpower of some kind. Oh yeah, of course. Something that helps me, XD, is to remember that what your consciousness is doing is it's not trying to inflict you with a sense of your own foolishness. It's trying to show you how far you've grown. That's something that I think is very important. That when you're standing there and you have that memory and you go, oh my goodness, I can't believe that. That's what I said, oh God, and you feel bad about it, you feel guilty about it. It's your consciousness in that moment, for whatever reason, revealing to you how far along you are and how much you've grown. That you're no longer the person and that you're actually embarrassed of that person that you used to be. Well, you can only be embarrassed of that person that you used to be if you've grown. And so these are the moments when your consciousness says, look how grown you've become. Look how far along you are. And when you look back on the person that you used to be and you have that sense of shame or that sense of guilt, you should also have a sense of pride and a sense of accomplishment in yourself, because you know better now. You've come farther now. And you shouldn't, and even though those moments are hard, you should know that you are better off for it. That can you imagine if you had that image pop up and you went, haha, yeah, that was right. Well, that's not what happens. You have a natural revulsion, and that's a good thing. Look how far you've come. You should celebrate it. It's like your consciousness giving you permission to pat yourself on the back for a job well done. You've done it. Lou says, great articles today. Been months. Glad I caught you today. Well, I'm glad that you're here, Lou. And I'm glad to hear that you guys enjoyed the articles today. Sometimes I get a little worried about reading articles and that people kind of get... There's a little... I get a sense... Not a sense, but like a concern, I guess. And maybe it's just my own internal paranoia that people are tuning out when I do that. But I always get good feedback, and so I think I'll just keep trusting my instincts on what people, on what I should send into the world. Here in Ontario, Doug Ford government gains double-digit lead over Ontario Liberals, polls suggest. What a failed state we are, dude. Like, what a ridiculous place. That this clown, we can't actually get reasonable opposition to this clown. Like, he's just a cartoonish buffoon who doesn't have real thoughts, has no idea for Ontario, and has completely tanked our economy. And we can't actually mount a significant opposition to this guy. It's embarrassing. We should be embarrassed. Like, the Doug Ford administration has made our economy about the same as Alabama's. It's just stupid. It's just dumb what we're doing. But we love it. That's why we keep voting for him. 2 Liberal MPs break ranks, call for Israel arms embargo. We may see a Trudeau government faced with historical circumstances such that it ends up making the right decision at some point. 2 Liberal MPs in the Toronto area have broken ranks with the Trudeau government regarding Israel's assault on Gaza, endorsing an arms embargo on Israel until it complies with international law. As of March 11th, Israel's attacks have killed more than 31,000 people in Gaza, including 12,300 children, according to Palestinian health officials. Another 8,000 people are believed to be buried under rubble. I'm sure they're fine. Meanwhile, the Israeli military continues to impede deliveries of humanitarian aid entering the besieged enclave and has repeatedly fired on aid trucks. On March 5th, a coalition of Palestinian Canadians with families in Gaza and lawyers and human rights activists filed a lawsuit against Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly, arguing that military exports to Israel violate Canadian and international law. Davenport MP Julie Dowsowitz announced her support for suspending Canada's arms exports to Israel in a statement published on March 1st. The statement was an update of an earlier version that did not include such a call. In the updated statement, Dowsowitz acknowledged that he'd had many constituents contact her office, calling for an end to arms exports to Israel, sanction on Israel, and severing diplomatic ties with the state. Dezowicz approvingly cited the Office of United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights' February 23rd statement, calling for an immediate halt on all arms export to Israel. I support their calls for an arms embargo, Dezowicz said. The Maple reached out to the 23 Liberal MPs who signed an October 17th petition calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza 2 months before Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did, asking whether they shared Dezowitz's position on arms exports to Israel. Dezowicz was not a signatory to the October petition. The only response came from Beach's East York MP Nathaniel Eskin Smith, who provided a link to a February 17th post on a Substack newsletter calling for a Global Affairs Canada to review whether or not Canadian military exports to Israel comply with the International Arms Trade Treaty, to which Canada is a signatory, and the Domestic Export and Import Permits Act. The EIPA stipulates that military export permits cannot be granted if the products could be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international human rights law, or serious acts of violence against women and children. As Global Affairs reviews and reconsiders its position, we should pause any further exports for the foreseeable future, Erskine Smith added in his email to the Maple. 3 other Liberals, Shafkat Ali, Joel Lightbound, and Canada-Palestine Parliamentary Friendship Group Chair Salman Zahid have entertained the possibility of supporting an arms embargo in the wake of the International Court of Justice's preliminary ruling that Israel is plausibly committing genocide in Gaza, as has Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet. None of these MPs, however, have publicly endorsed an arms embargo. The federal NDP has explicitly called for an end to arms sales to Israel since May 2021, when Israel launched a previous assault on Gaza. That position is also shared by the Green Party. Evolving positions on arms exports to Israel. In an earlier statement on the topic, Dezowicz cited a comment from Minister Joly, who misleadingly claimed that Canada does not provide any arms or military equipment to Israel, an apparent reference to direct military aid transfers, which Canada does not provide. Regarding military exports from private companies, Dezowicz quoted GAC's often repeated line that the ministry has not received or approved any applications for permits to export full weapon systems to Israel, and described all newly authorized permits for military exports to Israel as being for non-lethal goods. Arms monitoring experts and human rights activists have panned that description as legally meaningless, noting that non-lethal could refer to components of deadly military hardware. As the Maple was the first to report, Canada has approved at least $28.5 million in military exports to Israel since October 7th. In her February 2nd statement, Dezowicz said, "I do not support arms exports to non-NATO and non-democratic countries." This would exclude 2/3 of the top 12 non-U.S. destinations for Canadian military exports in 2022: Saudi Arabia, India, Qatar, Ukraine, South Korea, Australia, Taiwan, and Japan. Dezowicz has publicly expressed support for sending Canadian military aid to Ukraine and supports the country's war effort. Dezowicz's comment about not supporting exports to non-NATO countries was not included or addressed in the latest version of her statement, and her office did not respond to questions from the Maple about it last month. In addition to Canada's military exports to Israel, the Canadian military announced in December that it planned to buy $43 million of Spike LR-2 guided missiles from Israeli state-owned firm Rafael Advanced Defense Systems for Canadian troops stationed in Latvia on a NATO mission. The missiles, which spread tiny cubic fragments up to 20 meters away from their blast sites, are believed to have been used by Israeli forces in the attacks on Gaza in 2008 and 9, 2014, 2021, and in the ongoing war on the besieged Strip. Neither Dezowicz nor Erskine Smith responded to a question from the Maple about whether they supported an embargo on imports as well, which anti-war groups argue fuel Israel's war machine. A turning tide. Michael Buchert, a spokesperson for the advocacy group Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, told The Maple that Desowitt's and Erkin Smith's evolving positions are reflective of a growing divide within the Liberal Party. He explained that the divide is between those who are closer to the leadership's position, which is quite pro-Israel and has been for many years, and those who want to see Canada take a more proactive approach and be supportive of promoting human rights in Palestine. The facts on the ground are so severe, I think that it's increasingly hard for the government to maintain some of its positions, Buchert added, noting that the ICJ's ruling that Israel must take steps to prevent genocide risks making Canada an accomplice to genocide. At the same time, he noted, there's been an incredible grassroots outrage and mobilizing in support of the Palestinian cause, creating local pressures that MPs have to contend with. A major barrier to more Liberal MPs endorsing an arms embargo is that the Canadian government denies it's selling arms to Israel at all, which Buchert calls a strategy of deliberate misinformation. For a Liberal MP to endorse a ban on arms sales, they would effectively have to accuse their party leadership of lying, a risk Buchert says is likely part of their calculations. It's interesting that Canada's response is obfuscation, and not just owning their policy, he said. Canada doesn't say that it's proud of its military trade with Israel, but it tries to pretend that it doesn't exist. That sends a message to me that they're on the defensive about it, which means that they are open to public pressure. A lesson from Mulrooney. Buchert noted that during the first Palestinian Intifada, which lasted from 1987 to 1993, the Conservative government of the late Prime Minister Brian Mulroney effectively imposed a two-way arms embargo on Israel, which former Canadian diplomat Andrew Robinson said was very likely directly related to Canadian concerns about Israel's actions. Mulroney was a staunch supporter of Israel who contended that supporting Israel was morally equivalent to opposing apartheid in South Africa, ignoring the African National Congress's historic support for Palestinian liberation. Last October, Mulroney called on the Canadian government to offer its complete blanket support for Israel, which he identified as an innocent victim in the wake of Hamas's attack on southern Israel. The attack resulted in the deaths of approximately 700 civilians in Israel, along with hundreds of military and security personnel. But as Prime Minister, Mulroney often clashed with his Foreign Affairs Minister Joe Clark, who was critical of Israel's suppression of the Palestinian uprising. The data, as detailed in an April 2022 CJPME report, suggests that Clark won the internal debate. Good policy can come from unexpected places, and it might just be historical circumstances. We may even see a Trudeau government faced with historical circumstances such that it ends up making the right decision at some point, but we haven't gotten there yet, Buchert said. I feel like they just put this Mulroney point in just to be like, Mulroney, he was a genocidal maniac. Just Mulroney was a dickhead. We've got first-time commentator Chase on Twitch. Good to see you. Would I be able to find that has a new bookshelf? What is this? This is an exceedingly rare and fascinating article in French magazine Marianne, who got access to several confidential defense reports from the French army on the situation in Ukraine. Well, clicking on the link's not going to do anything for me. I've got no way to get it onto the screen, but hold on. Let's see if I can find this quickly. This is R.N. Bertrand Twitter. Let's see if I can find this, guys. Dude, it was so ridiculous when somebody just straight up called this guy out on, he's like, yeah, we don't impose our values on countries. And somebody just shouted out, unless we invade them. Then he was like, ha ha ha, you got me, ha ha ha. I'm like, these people are kind of psychos, honestly. Yeah, I can't seem to actually find his... hold on, I bet you. Marianne. No. French magazine. Yeah. I'm just not finding it, dude. Yeah, the trouble that I have is like you can't... If I go to Google, yeah, okay. Let's try it. Hold on. French art. Has a new bookshelf. Putting links on Twitch are not going to matter. Yeah, I'm just not finding it. Like if you give me the headline, like the article name, like the name of the give me the headline. Type this is an exceedingly rare. Okay. No, that doesn't seem right. Oh, is it also in French? Yeah, like. Well, I mean, what am I going to do with that? Like, what am I going to do with that if it's in French? Here we go. Oh, okay. Hold on. He's got it all written out here. All right, cool. We did it. This is an exceedingly rare and fascinating article in French magazine Marianne, who got access to several confidential defense reports from the French army on the situation in Ukraine. This is going to be great. Oh, I'm here for this. The situation looks exceedingly bleak for Ukraine, which might in part explain Macron's recent declarations around sending troops to Ukraine. I translated the important parts. A Ukrainian military victory now seems impossible. The reports Marianne consulted write that Ukraine's counteroffensive gradually bogged down in mud and blood and did not result in any strategic gain, and that its planning, conceived by Kiev and Western general staffs, turned out to be disastrous. Planners thought that once the first Russian defense lines were breached, the entire front would collapse. These fundamental preliminary phases were conducted without considering the morale forces of the enemy in defense. That is, the will of the Russian soldier to hold onto the terrain. The reports also highlight the inadequacy of the training of Ukrainian soldiers and officers, due to a lack of officers and a significant number of veterans. These Year 2 soldiers from Ukraine, often trained for no more than 3 weeks, were launched into an assault on a Russian fortification line that proved impregnable, without any air support, with disparate Western equipment that was less efficient than the old Soviet material, obsolete, easy to maintain, and capable of being used in degraded mode, the report mentions. The Ukrainian troops had no hope of breaking through. Add to this the Russian super dominance in the field of electronic jamming, penalizing, on the Ukrainian side, the use of drones and command systems. The Russian army is today the tactical and technical reference for thinking and implementing the defensive mode, writes the report. Not only does Moscow have heavy engineering equipment that allowed it to construct defensive works, almost total absence of this material on the Ukrainian side and the impossibility for Westerners to supply it quickly, but the 1,200-kilometer front, known as the Sorokovine Line, after a Russian general, has been mined to a huge extent. The report also highlights that contrary to Ukraine, the Russians have managed their reserve troops well. to ensure operational endurance. According to this document, Moscow reinforces its units before they are completely worn out, mixes recruits with experienced troops, ensures regular rest periods in the rear, and always had a coherent reserve force to manage unforeseen events. This is far from the widespread idea in the West of a Russian army sending its troops to the slaughter without counting. To date, the Ukrainian General Staff does not have a critical mass of land forces capable of inter-arms maneuver at the core level capable of challenging the Russian counterparts to break through its defensive lines, concludes this confidential defense report, according to which the gravest error of analysis and judgment would be to continue to seek exclusive military solutions to stop the hostilities. A French officer summarizes, "It is clear, given the forces present, that Ukraine cannot win this war militarily." The conflict entered a critical phase in December. "The combativeness of Ukrainian soldiers is deeply affected," mentions a forward-looking report for the year 2024. Zelensky would need 35,000 men per month. He's not recruiting half of that, while Putin draws from a pool of 30,000 volunteers per month, observes a military officer returning from Kiev. In terms of equipment, the balance is just as unbalanced. The failed offensive of 2023 tactically destroyed half of Kiev's 12 combat brigades. Since then, Western aid has never been so low. It is therefore clear that no Ukrainian offensive can be launched this year. The West can supply 3D printers to manufacture drones or loitering munitions, but can never print men, notes this report. Given this situation, it may have been decided to strengthen the Ukrainian army, not with fighters, but with support forces in the rear, allowing Ukrainian soldiers to be freed up for the front, admits a senior officer, confirming a ramp-up of Western military personnel in civilian clothes. Besides the Americans, who allowed the New York Times to visit a CIA camp, there are quite a few Britons, slips a military officer, who does not deny the presence of French special forces, notably combat swimmers, for training missions. The risk of a Russian breakthrough is real. On February 17th, Kiev had to abandon the city of Advika in the northern suburbs of Donetsk, which had until then been a fortified stronghold. It was both the heart and symbol of Ukrainian resistance in the Russian-speaking Donbass, highlights a report on the Battle of Advika, drawing a series of damning lessons. The Russians changed their modus operandi by compartmentalizing the city, and especially by using guiding bombs on a large scale for the first time, notes the document. When a 115mm artillery shell carries 7 kilograms of explosive, the gliding bomb delivers between 200 and 700 kilograms, and can thus pierce concrete structures more than 2 meters thick. A hell for Ukrainian defenses, which lost more than 1,000 men per day. Furthermore, the Russians used sound suppressors on light infantry weapons to foil acoustic detection systems on the ground. The decision to retreat by the Ukrainian armed forces was a surprise, notes this last report, highlighting its suddenness and lack of preparation, fearing that this choice was more endured than decided by the Ukrainian command, suggesting a possible onset of disarray. The Ukrainian armed forces have tactically shown that they do not possess the human and material capabilities to hold a sector of the front that is subjected to the assailants' effort, continued the document. The Ukrainian failure in Advika shows that despite the emergency deployment of an elite brigade, the 3rd Azov Air Assault Brigade, the Nazis, Kiev is not capable of locally restoring a sector on the front that collapses, alerts this last report. What the Russians will do with this tactical success remains to be seen. Will they continue in the current mode of nibbling and slowly shaking the entire front line, or will they seek to break through in depth? The terrain behind Advika allows it, signals the recent document, also warning that Western sources tend to underestimate the Russians, themselves adept at the practice of Maskirovka, appearing weak when strong. According to this analysis, after 2 years of war, Russian forces have thus shown their ability to develop operational endurance that allows them to wage a slow and long-intensity war based on the continuous attrition of the Ukrainian army. Man, I'm glad I read that. Super glad I read that. Fantastic. Yeah, I thought the orcs were losing. I thought the orcs were losing. That's fantastic. Fantastic article. Fantastic article. Because it really affirms what I have, like, I have been living in kind of a realm of speculation on the Ukrainian war, right? And getting, like, sources from, like, guys like Scott Ritter, Douglas McGregor, right? Those are pretty common voices that I will listen to and hear on the subject. But this is literally like the French military, right? Like, that's what makes that such a powerful document, is that it's not coming from a critic. It's not coming from a critic. It's not coming from somebody who is looking at the situation and trying to call it as they see it, given their knowledge of how these systems work, like McGregor and like Ritter, right? This is the French military who went in there, who saw what was going on, and who wrote a report for their own people in France. And that document has been gotten, and now it's been published. Like, this is significant declaration, and it confirms everything that critics had been speculating the whole time, right? And so now it's no longer speculation. Now it's straight up, there it is. You're not going to deny it, are you? Like, why do you disagree with the French? NATO builds special forces 100 miles from Ukraine. Like, to me, what's wild about this would be if the NATO countries started to actually send troops. Like, that's what's crazy to me about this. Like, that they're not actually saying, they're not talking about negotiating a peace settlement. Like, they're actually going to double down. That to me is unbelievably wild. That they're actually thinking that they're going to double down on this. Like, I don't know why anybody in the French military would go. I don't know why anybody is actually thinking, let's go fight this war that we obviously helped instigate and are obviously prolonging. Like, it just seems like the most ass-backward thing for a people to do. And yet it seems like that's what they're dedicated to doing. Like, the article even even mentioned what they're calling, what, the 3rd Battalion, the Azov boys, right? They even said Azov in the report, right? So, like, the Nazis are operational, and they're still operating, and they're still going around, they're still doing what they're doing. And we're all supposed to, like, root for Ukraine in the middle of this fucking Western-caused disaster? Like, what is going to happen if Russia finally decides to just pull the trigger and just march on over? Like, I think it's just going to be horrible. So, seems to me like the ball is in Putin's court. And if the Ukrainians were wise, they would be suing for peace. They would be saying, hey, we need to negotiate a peace settlement here. Because they're going to lose everything. They're going to lose everything if they don't. Like, Ukraine's neighbors are going to claim any part of Ukraine that's worth claiming. And they're going to make Ukraine, which is essentially going to be the city of Kiev, just a rump state that's completely dependent on their neighbors for base resources. Like, they're not going to have access to farmland and shit. Like, it's a pretty bad time for Ukraine. And it's all revolving around this very stupid way of living and this stupid way of being. Like, what are you fighting for? Actually. Well, we've reached the end of this one. Always remember, guys, each and every one of you is a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.